The humid night clung to my skin like a second oppressive layer as I stepped off the creaking shuttle into a world that seemed to breathe a slow, mysterious rhythm of its own. I had come to the bayou near Houma, Louisiana, a place where the air tasted of decay and promise in equal measure, and where every sound, from the rasp of cicadas to the distant, mournful call of unseen creatures, spoke of secrets buried deep beneath tangled cypress knees and dark, still water. My name is Marisol Dupree, and I left behind the neon glare and frantic pulse of my old life as a journalist after loss reduced my heart to a fragile shell. I sought refuge in this raw, living wilderness, convinced that its ancient sorrow might somehow mirror and eventually heal the grief that had long overshadowed my days. I remember my arrival vividly. It was shortly after dusk when I first saw the cabin, a ramshackle structure of weathered wood and sagging porches, perched at the edge of a slow-moving bayou. Its peeling paint and broken shutters seemed to echo with the voices of the past, as if the house itself had once been a sanctuary for souls burdened by sorrow. My partner, Andre, a man of steady pragmatism and deep, quiet strength, had come with me in search of solace and a fresh start, though his eyes betrayed a cautious skepticism that I sometimes wished I could assuage with my own determined optimism. We had also enlisted the help of Celeste, a local guide whose deep knowledge of voodoo lore and the supernatural rhythms of the bayou lent an almost otherworldly gravity to our undertaking. Celeste's eyes, dark and knowing, seemed to hold centuries of secrets, and her presence alone made it clear that this was not merely a place to escape from the world. It was a world unto itself. I still recall the first evening vividly. The air was so thick with humidity that even the slightest movement stirred a haze of warm mist. I sat on the rickety porch of our new refuge, my thoughts tangled with memories of a life I had lost. As I sipped lukewarm tea, a sound rose from the water, a soft, almost musical whisper that mingled with the croaking of frogs and the rustle of Spanish moss. It was as if the bayou itself were exhaling a secret lament. Andre, ever the realist, merely adjusted his cap and muttered something about the natural chorus of nocturnal creatures. But I felt it deep in my bones, a presence, ancient and sorrowful, that refused to be ignored. In the days that followed, our life in the bayou unfolded in a tapestry of practical struggles and uncanny occurrences. Every morning, the humid air would press in on us as we waded through a series of daily chores, fetching water from a rain catchment system, tending to a small garden that struggled against the oppressive moisture, and repairing the makeshift barriers we had erected to keep out the encroaching wild. The challenges were many: invasive insects that swarmed without mercy, sudden floods that transformed familiar paths into rushing waterways, and a persistent, suffocating heat that left our skin slick with sweat even before noon. Yet, amid these struggles, there was a strange beauty to it all, a beauty that came from the raw, untamed pulse of nature itself, a beauty that whispered of forgotten times and deep, unspoken memories. One humid afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent and cast long, trembling shadows on the water, I was out gathering wild herbs near the edge of the bayou when I noticed something extraordinary. Nestled among a bed of vibrant green ferns lay a small totem, fashioned entirely from reeds and bits of bone. It was arranged in a precise circle, each reed carefully interlaced with a bone that might have come from a bird or a small animal. The artifact was incongruous with the natural decay of its surroundings, almost as if it had been deliberately placed there, a silent message left by unseen hands. I knelt and brushed away a few droplets of dew to get a better look. My heart raced with both excitement and dread. I had heard whispers among locals about such tokens, symbols used in ancient rituals meant to appease the spirits of the bayou, to protect the living from the restless dead. I hurried back to the cabin to show Andre and Celeste what I had found, my mind buzzing with possibilities. That evening, Celeste took me aside as we sat around a flickering lantern on the porch. Her voice was low and measured, the cadence of someone who had spent a lifetime immersed in the mysteries of these lands. "You have found one of the signs," she said softly, her eyes narrowing as if peering into the unseen. "These totems are not placed by chance. They are a message from the spirits. They warn that the balance between the living and the dead is shifting. You must be careful, Marisol." I listened, transfixed by the gravity in her tone, and felt a surge of determination mingled with apprehension. I had come here to heal my own wounds, but it was becoming clear that the bayou had its own plans, its own burdens to share. The nights grew longer and more laden with mystery. I began to keep a small digital recorder by my bedside, capturing every odd sound. The distant lapping of water that sometimes carried a faint, echoing voice, the subtle rustling that might have been laughter, and the occasional inexplicable hum that resonated with an ancient cadence. I would replay these recordings in the early hours of the morning, trying desperately to decipher their meaning. There were moments when I believed I could hear a name, a soft, mournful syllable that sounded like Selena or Mara, whispered repeatedly into the darkness. Each time, my pulse quickened, and I scribbled frantic notes in my journal, trying to capture the ephemeral patterns of a language older than memory itself. Andre remained the voice of cautious realism throughout these unsettling events. He would often say, "It's just the bayou doing what bayous do, Marisol. The humidity, the insects, the noise, it all blends together in a way that can fool the mind." Yet, I could see the worry in his eyes when I spoke of voices and totems, and I knew that even he felt the creeping chill of something beyond ordinary nature. Despite his reservations, he helped fortify our home, installing extra barriers along the lower walls of the cabin and patching up every crevice with a diligence born of both survival instincts and quiet fear. Together, we tried to balance the demands of practical living with the allure of the supernatural. Our days a mixture of hard labor and long, quiet moments spent in vigilant wonder. One night stands out in my memory, as if etched in the very air of the bayou. It was during a heavy rainstorm, the kind that turns the world into a blurry watercolor of sound and motion, when I awoke to the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the wooden porch. I sat up in bed, the darkness around me thick and impenetrable, and listened as the steps, a slow, deliberate pacing, moved back and forth along the edge of the cabin. My heart pounded as I reached for the flashlight on my nightstand and crept to the door. I opened it slowly, half expecting to see an intruder from a world of the living. Instead, there was nothing there, only the soft patter of rain and the murmur of the bayou. Yet, I could still feel the echo of those footsteps, as if they had left an imprint in the very air, a silent reminder that we were not as alone as we might wish to be. In the days that followed, the unease deepened into a quiet, pervasive tension that wove its way into every corner of our existence. I began to notice changes in the behavior of the wildlife. The birds, usually so vibrant in the early mornings, would sometimes fall silent as if in mourning. The frogs that called the swamp home croaked a low, discordant note that set my teeth on edge, and at times the bayou itself seemed to ripple with a strange energy, a subtle vibration that I felt in my bones, as though the earth were trying to speak a language that my mind could not comprehend. My nights turned into a ritual of observation and recording. I would sit on the creaking porch, recorder in hand, listening to the chorus of the night, and scribble down every detail in my journal. I described the murmurings that seemed to rise from the water, the appearance of flickering lantern-like lights drifting silently over the marsh, and the occasional, inexplicable rustling in the distance that sounded almost like a lament. I wrote about the totems that began to appear more frequently near the edge of the property, small constructions of reed and bone that were arranged in patterns too deliberate to be random. I wondered if these were warnings, markers of a boundary that I was not meant to cross, or if they were a plea for remembrance from souls long forgotten. Celeste's guidance became indispensable as I delved deeper into the mysteries of the bayou. Over long, languid afternoons spent in her modest, incense-filled home on the outskirts of town, she recounted tales of voodoo and ancient rituals that had been passed down through generations. "The bayou is a living thing," she would say, her voice low and solemn, "and it remembers everything. It holds the sorrow of every lost soul and the joy of every moment of grace. When you see these signs, it means that the spirits are restless. They are calling out, seeking balance, yearning for recognition." Her words, woven with both mysticism and a grounded understanding of the natural world, resonated deeply with me. I began to incorporate her teachings into my nightly routines, performing small rituals of protection, sprinkling salt along the threshold, lighting a small candle at dusk, and reciting chants that Celeste taught me in a language that felt ancient and intimate. Andre, though still firmly rooted in his practical worldview, seemed to soften over time, his earlier skepticism giving way to a quiet acceptance of the uncanny. I caught him on more than one occasion, pausing at the door to listen to a distant call or glancing out into the darkness with a furrowed brow. "Maybe there's more to this place than we can explain, Marisol," he said one humid evening, his voice tinged with a reluctant wonder as he watched the water ripple in the moonlight. "Maybe the bayou is trying to tell us something." I nodded, feeling a kinship with him in our shared, unspoken acknowledgement that the land had its own ancient wisdom, a wisdom that we, with our modern minds and weary hearts, were only beginning to grasp. In the midst of these supernatural encounters, I began to find solace in the act of recording my experiences. My journal became a confidant, a repository for the raw, unfiltered emotions that swirled within me. I wrote about the way the humid air seemed to shimmer with unseen energy, about the inexplicable feeling that I was being watched by eyes that belonged to another time, and about the ghostly silhouettes that sometimes appeared in the corner of my vision when I was alone in the dark. Each entry was a piece of a puzzle, a mosaic of sensory impressions and whispered legends that, when put together, began to form a picture of a world where the living and the dead coexisted in a delicate, eternal dance. One particularly vivid night, after a day of relentless rain that had left the bayou cloaked in a spectral mist, I set out on a solitary walk along a narrow, waterlogged path. The moon was hidden behind heavy clouds, and the only light came from the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the twisted silhouettes of cypress trees. As I walked, the soft hum of the water mingled with a faint, almost imperceptible melody, a tune that seemed to rise from the depths of the swamp. I followed the sound, my heart pounding with a mixture of trepidation and a fierce longing to understand. It led me to a small clearing where the ground was damp and soft, and in the center of the clearing lay a small, carefully arranged bundle of reeds and bones, similar to the totems I had seen before. I knelt and reached out to touch the bundle, and in that instant I felt a rush of cold, as if I were brushing against the breath of a long-departed soul. The sensation was fleeting, yet it left me with an indelible impression, a deep, aching certainty that the bayou was not merely a passive landscape, but an active participant in the drama of memory and loss. In the weeks that followed, the supernatural signs continued to manifest in subtle yet persistent ways. I began to notice that on nights when the humidity was at its peak and the air shimmered with heat, the bayou would mirror my own emotions with uncanny precision. When I was overcome with melancholy, the water would seem to ripple with sorrow, and the distant call of an unseen creature would echo with the sound of lament. There were mornings when the mist would part in just the right way to reveal fleeting images, a pale hand pressing against a weathered trunk, or the faint outline of a face in the dark, reflective surface of the water. I recorded these moments with a mixture of scientific detachment and poetic awe, trying to capture the interplay between the tangible and the spectral in words and sketches that might someday form a testament to my experiences. One day, after returning from a long, meandering walk through the bayou with my notebook filled with frantic scribbles and detailed sketches, I encountered Celeste again at a small, rickety cafe that served as a meeting point for locals. Over a pot of strong, dark coffee, she listened intently as I recounted the latest signs, the mysterious totems, the eerie sounds, the shifting shadows. "The spirits are restless tonight," she said quietly, her eyes reflecting the depth of her conviction. "There is a story here, one that has been whispered on these waters for generations. You must be patient, Marisol. The bayou speaks in layers, and each sign is a piece of a much larger puzzle." Her words, gentle yet filled with an unyielding gravity, made me feel both small and infinitely significant. I realized then that my quest for understanding was not just about unraveling a supernatural mystery, but about connecting with a legacy of pain and beauty that had shaped this land for centuries. As autumn deepened and the heavy humidity began to give way to cooler, drier air, I found that my relationship with the bayou was evolving. The spectral occurrences, while still disconcerting, became less intrusive and more like gentle nudges, a soft reminder of the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. I began to integrate the ritual practices that Celeste had taught me into my daily routine. Every evening before dark, I would step outside onto the porch, light a small candle, and recite a short prayer of remembrance, letting the flame's flicker guide my thoughts. In those moments, as the candle's light danced on the rippling water and the cool night air carried away the lingering heat of the day, I felt a profound sense of connection to the land, to its unseen inhabitants, and to the fragments of memory that had accompanied me on this journey. Andre's presence remained a steady anchor throughout these unfolding mysteries. Although he maintained his practical demeanor, I could see that even he was touched by the bayou's strange allure. There were times when, after a long day of laboring under the oppressive humidity, he would pause at the edge of the property, his gaze lingering on the dark water, as if listening to a voice only he could hear. "It's like the bayou holds all our secrets," he remarked one evening, his tone thoughtful as he stared into the inky depths. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle around us like the thick mist that enveloped the night. In that shared silence, we both understood that the path to healing was intertwined with the mystery that surrounded us. Months passed, and with each day, the bayou's whispered secrets seemed to weave themselves more intricately into the fabric of my being. My journal filled with accounts of every strange encounter, every subtle sign, every moment of inexplicable beauty that emerged from the darkness. I began to see the bayou not as a place of random horrors, but as a repository of ancient grief and enduring hope, a living tapestry of memories that called out for acknowledgement and healing. In its quiet, relentless rhythm, I found a mirror for my own battered heart, and slowly, I began to understand that embracing the unknown was the only way to mend what had been broken inside me. Now, as I sit on this creaking porch under a vast, star-strewn sky, the humid air thick with the scent of moss and water, I feel a deep, unyielding connection to the bayou. I have come to accept that the ghosts and murmurs, the spectral totems and haunting voices, are not enemies to be banished, but old friends whose sorrows and joys are etched into the very essence of this land. Every night, as I listen to the soft lapping of the water and the distant call of creatures unseen, I am reminded that healing is not the eradication of pain, but the acceptance of it, a gentle, ongoing conversation between the past and the present, between loss and the possibility of renewal. I have chosen to remain here, in the heart of the bayou, not because I am unafraid, but because I have learned that true solace comes from facing the mysteries of life head on. The bayou, with its layered whispers and timeless rhythm, has become a sanctuary for my wounded spirit, a place where every humid breath, every shiver-inducing sound, and every flicker of spectral light is a reminder that our stories, no matter how tragic, are interwoven with the beauty of nature. In its murky depths, I have discovered a legacy of both sorrow and hope, a legacy that calls out to me to honor the past while forging a path to a future filled with quiet, enduring light. This is my account of life in the bayou, a journey of loss, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of understanding in a world where the line between the living and the dead is as fluid as the water itself. Each day, I document the echoes of the past with my recorder and my journal, striving to capture the delicate balance between fear and wonder that defines this place. And every night, as I lie awake listening to the bayou's ancient lullaby, I feel a quiet assurance that in embracing its mysteries, I have begun to heal, not by erasing the pain, but by allowing it to flow through me, transforming sorrow into a quiet, unyielding hope that sustains me. I remain here on this weathered porch in the company of ancient trees and whispering waters, grateful for the chance to reconnect with the raw, unfiltered pulse of nature. The bayou's secrets, once a source of terror and uncertainty, have become a gentle guide on my journey toward redemption, a journey that is as much about facing my own inner demons as it is about unraveling the spectral tapestry that envelops these humid, hallowed lands. And so, with every whispered voice and every mysterious totem that appears in the murk of the night, I continue to listen, to record, and to honor the enduring legacy of the bayou, a legacy that reminds me that even in the darkest, most mysterious corners of the world, there is beauty, there is life, and there is the promise of a new dawn waiting to break through the fog of yesterday. I can still recall the moment I first set foot on the Outer Banks, not as a triumphant arrival on a sunlit shore, but as a hesitant step into a world where time itself seems to ebb and flow with the relentless tide. It was a blustery November afternoon when I, Elaine Porter, a recently retired high school teacher with an insatiable passion for maritime history, disembarked from a creaking bus that rattled along a lonely coastal road. I carried nothing more than a battered suitcase, a well-thumbed journal, and the quiet hope of escaping the oppressive clamor of city life for the solemn beauty of the sea. My destination was a weathered, secluded beach house, perched on a narrow strip of land overlooking the Atlantic, a place that locals claimed was haunted by echoes of lost sailors and vengeful pirate spirits. I wasn't entirely sure what I was searching for, but I sensed that the rhythmic lull of the ocean and the ghostly whispers of the coast held the promise of both healing and revelation. The journey itself was transformative. As the bus wound its way along the rugged coastline, I peered out the grimy window at the vast expanse of blue that stretched to the horizon, punctuated by rocky outcrops and the occasional silhouette of a lonely lighthouse. The air smelled sharply of salt and seaweed, a stark contrast to the stale confines of the urban transit I had left behind. I felt simultaneously both exposed and strangely protected, as though the ocean's vast embrace might wash away the remnants of past sorrows. When I finally arrived at the beach house, it stood solitary against the elements, its faded white siding, beaten by years of wind and salt, its sagging porch creaking with each gust that swept in from the Atlantic. There was something profoundly honest about the building, a raw, unpretentious quality that immediately drew me in, despite the chill that ran down my spine as I surveyed the lonely stretch of sand and surf. I settled into the house with a mixture of quiet excitement and deep, introspective apprehension. My partner, Greg, a reserved man with a steadfast nature and a cautious view of the world, had joined me on this venture seeking a simpler life far from the relentless pace of the city. Greg had always been the voice of practicality, steady, reliable, and a bit reluctant when it came to matters of the supernatural. Yet even he couldn't deny that the Outer Banks possessed an eerie magnetism that pulled at the edges of his rational mind. In the first few days, we busied ourselves with the mundane necessities of off-grid living, repairing leaky windows, setting up a solar panel system that groaned under the relentless coastal humidity, and learning to live with the ever-present taste of salt on our lips. Each morning, I would rise before dawn, drawn to the water as if by an unseen force, and wander the stretch of beach, notebook in hand, recording every peculiar detail, the way the mist hovered like a specter above the waves, the gentle rhythm of the surf that sometimes sounded oddly like a distant hymn. It wasn't long before the mysteries of the Outer Banks began to manifest in subtle yet undeniable ways. One twilight, as the sky melted from amber to deep indigo, I found myself sitting on the creaking porch with Greg, the ocean's steady pulse the only sound accompanying our silence. I watched the water's surface, which at that moment was as smooth and mirror-like as glass, when something unexpected caught my eye, a phantom silhouette that moved along the shoreline. It was as if a figure in tattered garments, blurred by the hazy light, had stepped onto the water's edge and was slowly drifting away. I called softly to Greg, "Did you see that?" But when he turned his head, his expression was one of polite nonchalance. "Probably just a trick of the light," he said, though I could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. That night, I couldn't shake the image. In my dreams, I saw a woman standing at the water's edge, her face half hidden by a cascade of wet hair, her eyes brimming with sorrow. The dream was vivid, and when I awoke, I found my hands trembling as I scribbled down every detail in my journal. The next morning, while strolling along the boardwalk that meandered near our house, I encountered Wade, a weather-beaten local fisherman whose family had spent generations making a living on these treacherous shores. His eyes, the color of storm-tossed seas, seemed to carry the weight of countless untold stories. Over a cup of strong, bitter coffee in the dim interior of a small seaside diner, he told me about the old legends of the Outer Banks. "They say," Wade began in a hushed tone, "that on nights when the fog is thick and the moon hides behind the clouds, you can hear the voices of shipwrecked sailors, lost souls, doomed to roam these waters forever. And sometimes, if you're lucky, or unlucky, you might catch a glimpse of their forms wandering the beach, forever searching for a way home." His words sent a shiver down my spine and planted a seed of both dread and fascination in my heart. I pressed him for details, but he only smiled sadly and said, "The sea keeps its secrets, miss. It's not for us to unravel." I could see, however, that his eyes betrayed a grudging belief that there was truth in the legends. In the following weeks, as I settled into the rhythm of life in the Outer Banks, the eerie signs continued to multiply. There were evenings when, just after sunset, I would wander alone along the shoreline, my journal and pen ready to capture any anomaly. I began to notice ghostly reflections in the surf, faint outlines of figures that appeared and vanished with the rolling tide, as if the ocean were briefly revealing the souls of long-forgotten mariners. I once recorded what I thought was the soft echo of a sailor's shanty carried on the breeze. The melody was haunting, imbued with both longing and melancholy. I listened to the recording over and over, trying to pick out distinct words, but all I could discern was a series of wistful, unresolved chords that made my heart ache. At our beach house, strange occurrences became part of our daily life. One night, as I sat on the creaking porch wrapped in a thick blanket and staring out at the endless dark sea, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps along the boardwalk, a slow, deliberate tapping that resonated on the wooden planks. I peered out into the darkness, but the boardwalk was deserted. Greg, who had been dozing on the couch inside, woke with a start when I called out. "I heard something," I whispered, my voice quivering with uncertainty. Greg's eyes, filled with a mix of concern and reluctance, met mine. "Maybe it was just the wind, Elaine. You know how these old boards can creak," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. I couldn't help but wonder if the footsteps were those of a ghost, an echo of someone who had once walked these same paths when the world was filled with life and laughter. I began to document these strange events meticulously in my journal, each entry a blend of factual observations and the raw emotional impressions that haunted my nights. I wrote about the ghostly silhouettes, the spectral voices that seemed to murmur from the depths of the ocean, and the inexplicable sensation that I was being watched by eyes from another time. Sometimes, as I pored over my scribbled notes by the light of an old oil lamp, I felt a profound loneliness that was both terrifying and achingly beautiful, a reminder that the past was never truly gone, but lingering like a fragile, unspoken memory in the salty air. In one particularly memorable instance, as a fierce autumn storm raged outside and the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls, I was awakened by a sharp, insistent knock at the door. I stumbled out of bed and, heart pounding, opened it to find no one there, only the relentless fury of the storm and the dark, churning sea in the distance. Yet, as I closed the door, I felt a cold draft sweep past me, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible sound, a whispered phrase that I could not quite make out, but that resonated deep within me. I couldn't tell if it was a fragment of a sailor's prayer or the ghostly echo of a long-forgotten farewell, but it left me trembling with a mixture of fear and a curious, inexplicable hope. As the weeks turned into months, I found that the supernatural phenomena began to weave themselves into the fabric of my new life. I continued to spend my mornings wandering the shoreline and my evenings on the porch, listening intently to the ocean's quiet lament. I made a habit of visiting Wade whenever I could, and he would share more fragments of the local lore, tales of shipwrecks, lost love, and the restless spirits of those doomed to wander the coast. I learned that many believed the ghostly images and eerie sounds were not meant to harm, but rather to serve as a reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of memory. Each tale, whether told with a hint of superstition or with the resigned certainty of one who had seen too much, added another layer of meaning to the mysteries I was experiencing. Greg, while still the voice of reason, slowly began to soften his skepticism. On nights when the darkness seemed to press in a little too closely, I would catch him sitting by the window with a distant, thoughtful look, as if he too were absorbing the silent stories of the sea. "Maybe there's something in these old legends after all," he would murmur to himself, and I knew that, deep down, the inexplicable occurrences were seeping into his guarded heart as well. Our conversations, once dominated by the pragmatic demands of maintaining a household in a remote, off-grid environment, increasingly turned to musings on the nature of memory, loss, and the possibility of redemption found in embracing the unknown. In the midst of all this, I began to compile my experiences into a narrative, a chronicle of my time on the Outer Banks that would capture not only the ghostly events, but also the personal transformation that had unfolded in tandem with them. I wrote fervently, my pen dancing across the pages of my journal as I described the interplay of light and shadow on the water, the soft, haunting echoes of voices from the deep, and the way the very air seemed to vibrate with the sorrow of lives long past. Each entry was a confession, a piece of my soul laid bare against the backdrop of a timeless seascape. I recorded the precise moment when I first saw that ghostly figure on the water, the way the ocean's surface rippled with a quiet urgency, as if it were trying to convey a secret too heavy for words. I wrote about the stormy nights when the line between reality and myth blurred, until I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. One evening, after a particularly evocative sunset that painted the sky in hues of crimson and gold, I found myself compelled to walk alone along the deserted boardwalk. The salty air was brisk against my cheeks, and the rhythmic crash of the waves provided a steady, almost hypnotic accompaniment to my thoughts. I walked slowly, each step measured and deliberate, until I reached a spot where the boardwalk curved away from the shore into a narrow strip of darkness. There, I paused, drawn by a sudden, inexplicable pull. I could sense a presence, a weight of sorrow and longing that seemed to hover just beyond the edge of the light. I stood there for a long, tense moment, listening to the ocean and trying to discern if the soft sound I had heard earlier was now a full, mournful melody. In that silence, I whispered a question into the void, a tentative plea for understanding. "Who are you?" The wind carried my words out to sea, and for a heartbeat, all was still. Then, faintly, as if in answer, I heard a soft, almost indistinguishable echo, a whisper of a name that I couldn't quite catch, but which resonated deeply within me, stirring memories and emotions I had long thought buried. Returning to the beach house that night, I felt both exhilarated and profoundly unsettled. The mysteries of the Outer Banks were not just legends to be recorded. They were living, breathing parts of my new reality. Over the next several months, as the chill of winter gave way to the tentative warmth of spring, I dedicated myself to documenting every odd occurrence, every spectral figure, every whispered echo of the past. I installed a few rudimentary cameras along the boardwalk and near the shoreline, hoping to capture the elusive images that danced on the periphery of my vision. I recorded the ambient sounds with my digital recorder, collecting the ocean's murmurs, the rustle of the dunes, and the occasional, inexplicable snap of a board or creak of a step where no one should be. Each morning, as I reviewed the footage or listened to the recorded voices, I found myself both haunted and strangely comforted by the evidence of the supernatural, a reminder that the past, with all its sorrow and mystery, was never truly gone, but lived on in the gentle echoes of the sea. Wade's tales became a constant source of both inspiration and caution. He would visit the beach house on overcast days, his weathered face etched with the wisdom of years spent braving the treacherous Atlantic. In the quiet, shadowed corners of a local bar, he shared stories of shipwrecks and spectral apparitions, of the way the ghostly remnants of lost sailors would sometimes emerge from the fog to wander the beach, forever searching for the shores they had once known. "They say the sea never forgets," he told me one rainy afternoon, his voice low and gravelly. "Every soul that's been claimed by these waters leaves behind a trace, a whisper in the wind, a shadow in the mist. And sometimes, if you're listening closely enough, you can hear their laments as raw and real as the roar of the ocean." His words, though steeped in superstition, resonated with me, affirming the sense that the ghosts I had encountered were not mere figments of an overactive imagination, but echoes of lives and loves lost to the merciless tides of time. Greg and I often spent our evenings in quiet conversation on the porch, our voices mingling with the lullaby of the surf. Though he remained reserved and often skeptical of the more paranormal aspects of my experiences, I could see that even he was touched by the spectral beauty of the Outer Banks. On more than one occasion, he would say in a low tone, "I can't explain it, Elaine, but sometimes I feel as if the ocean is singing a sorrowful song, one that tells the story of everything we've lost and everything we might still hope to find." His words, imbued with both melancholy and a quiet optimism, became a refrain that echoed in my mind as I continued to document each eerie occurrence. As the months slipped by, my once simple quest for solitude and creative inspiration evolved into a deeper journey of remembrance and reconciliation. My journal filled with not only observations of ghostly apparitions and inexplicable sounds, but also with my reflections on loss, memory, and the way the past can shape the present. I wrote of the delicate balance between fear and hope, of how the ghostly figures along the shore were not harbingers of doom, but silent testaments to lives that had been lived, loved, and ultimately claimed by the sea. Each entry was a meditation, a slow, thoughtful unraveling of a mystery that was both personal and timeless. One particularly poignant morning, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon in a burst of soft pink and lavender, I stepped outside onto the creaking porch with my journal in hand. The beach was deserted, the surf a gentle murmur in the early light. As I sat down, I felt a presence beside me, a warmth, a fleeting touch, as if someone had come to share in the quiet beauty of that moment. I couldn't see anyone, yet I felt a profound sense of connection, as if the spirits of the lost had come to offer their silent benediction. In that serene solitude, I wrote with a clarity and passion that I had not known in years, capturing the intricate interplay of memory and myth that defined my new life on the Outer Banks. It was then that I realized my decision to stay was not merely an escape from my past, but a bold embrace of a future defined by the delicate intermingling of sorrow and beauty. The ghostly echoes of shipwrecks and lost sailors, the spectral figures dancing along the shore in the twilight, and the soft, persistent murmur of the sea had become my muse, a source of endless inspiration and quiet transformation. I understood that every whispered shanty, every fleeting shadow on the water, was a story waiting to be told, a story of loss, resilience, and the unyielding eternal hope that even the harshest tides cannot wash away. Now, as I sit at my old, weathered desk in the fading light of another autumn day, the ocean's rhythmic lullaby serving as a constant reminder of both the power and the fragility of life, I feel an overwhelming gratitude for the path I have chosen. The Outer Banks have become not just my refuge, but my true home, a place where the line between the living and the lost blurs into a timeless dance of memory and possibility. Greg, ever the quiet pillar of strength, and I share our evenings in gentle conversation about the mysteries of the sea, while Wade's occasional visits bring fresh fragments of local lore that deepen my understanding of the spectral forces at work. Every day, I rise with the hope that the ocean's song will reveal a new secret, that every ghostly visage caught in the shimmer of dawn will add another verse to the epic of this haunted coast. I record my experiences meticulously, my journal a sacred ledger of every sound, every image, every emotion that the Outer Banks bestow upon me. I have come to accept that the ghosts are not enemies, but ancient storytellers, keepers of a legacy that stretches back through the mists of time, bearing witness to a world that once was and whispering the promise of a future shaped by both loss and love. This is my account, a journey from the frenetic energy of urban life to the quiet, mysterious embrace of the Outer Banks. It is a chronicle of ghostly apparitions, whispered legends, and the profound, transformative power of nature to heal a fractured soul. In the gentle interplay of light and shadow on the water, in the soft, haunting echoes of voices long past, I have found not only inspiration for my writing, but a deep, abiding hope that even the most sorrowful memories can give rise to new beginnings. And so, I remain here, amidst the rolling tides and shifting mists, a quiet witness to the enduring dance of life and death along the endless, enigmatic shore, a place where every day is a poem, and every night a lullaby sung by the restless, eternal sea. I was climbing a narrow, winding trail up the Blue Ridge Mountains on a day when the clouds had gathered like a silent congregation overhead, their heavy presence urging me onward. I had left behind the clamor of my former life in the city, a life saturated with endless deadlines and the ever-present hum of urban noise, to seek refuge in these ancient hills. My name is Evelyn Price, and I had come here with the fervent hope of rediscovering a part of myself that modernity had long since buried. I arrived at a modest cabin nestled in the forest, a rustic retreat of weathered wood and shuttered windows, perched on a gentle slope where the morning mist draped every branch and leaf in silver. Even before I set foot inside, the land whispered to me in a language older than words, the quiet rustling of leaves, the distant murmur of a brook, and the soft echo of a bird's call that seemed to carry secrets of love and loss from centuries past. I remember that first day vividly. The air was cool, almost electric with anticipation, and as I unburdened myself of the remnants of my previous life, I felt as though the mountains were welcoming me into a timeless sanctuary. I had chosen this place not only for solitude and the promise of creative renewal, but also because I longed to witness the interplay of nature and memory, to see if the legends I had once scoffed at in my youth might reveal themselves in these rugged hills. I was not entirely alone in this venture. My dearest friend Rosa, a gentle, intuitive soul who possessed an almost uncanny ability to sense the unseen, had come with me. Together, we intended to build our own small haven away from the frenetic pace of civilization, a place where art and spirituality could intertwine amid the whispers of the Blue Ridge. Our first nights were filled with a kind of awe that bordered on the mystical. I spent the early hours of each day sketching in my battered notebook, capturing the delicate interplay of morning light and mist as it danced over dew-laden ferns and ancient pines. Rosa, with her serene smile and quiet, knowing eyes, would often join me on long walks along trails that meandered through groves of towering trees and over rugged outcroppings. She spoke softly of the land, as if reciting poetry that had been etched into her very soul, and I began to suspect that the mountains held stories that were not written in any book, but whispered in the rustle of the leaves and the murmur of hidden streams. It wasn't long before I began to notice things that defied the ordinary. One crisp morning, while I was wandering alone along a narrow ridge overlooking a cascading stream, I came upon a curious sight, a series of faint, swirling patterns etched into the soft clay of the mountainside. At first, I assumed them to be natural formations, the work of wind and water over countless years, but as I knelt to examine them more closely, I discovered that the patterns were far too deliberate, too intricate. They resembled a kind of script, a series of symbols that glowed faintly in the soft light of dawn, as if they were charged with an energy beyond the natural. I felt my pulse quicken as I carefully drew them into my notebook, each curve and line a mystery begging to be solved. Was this an ancient language of the land? A remnant of a lost people whose voices still echoed among these hills? Or perhaps it was a message left by forces that dwelled in the realm between memory and myth. That discovery set my mind ablaze with questions, and I soon found myself listening more intently to the land. On many evenings, after Rosa and I returned to our cabin, I would sit on the worn wooden porch, the twilight deepening around me, and listen. There were moments when the wind carried with it a soft, almost imperceptible hum, a lullaby of sorts, resonating with an ineffable sorrow. One night, as I sat quietly in the gathering dark, I distinctly heard a faint giggle, as if the echo of a child's laughter floated through the branches. I froze, the sound both familiar and achingly distant, and in that instant I felt a presence. A gentle, wistful call from a realm that existed just beyond the edge of sight. I confided in Rosa about the laughter and the strange symbols, and she listened with eyes that seemed to reflect a lifetime of secret knowledge. "The Blue Ridge is a place of healing, Evelyn," she said softly one evening as we sat by a small crackling fire. "It's also a place where the past refuses to die, where every stone and every whisper holds a memory. Sometimes I sense that these voices are not meant to scare us, but to remind us that we are all connected to something far greater than ourselves." Her words, delivered in that gentle, unwavering tone, both comforted and unsettled me. I began to suspect that the land was speaking to us, inviting us to listen to the tales of those who had come before, a spectral dialogue between the living and the long silent echoes of a forgotten past. Days turned into weeks, and my journal filled with meticulous records of every odd occurrence. I documented the precise moments when the wind carried that faint, sorrowful hum, the temperature changes that seemed to coincide with the appearance of the mysterious symbols, and the fleeting shadows I caught out of the corner of my eye, glimpses of a pale, almost sorrowful face that vanished when I turned to look directly. Sometimes I would catch a reflection in a mountain stream that did not match my own, as if the water held another presence, watching me with eyes filled with unspoken grief. One evening, after a day of wandering deeper into the forest than ever before, I found myself drawn to a secluded glen, shrouded in a soft, ethereal mist. The air was cool and thick with the scent of pine resin and wet earth, and the silence was profound, as if the world had paused to listen. I settled on a fallen log and opened my journal, intending to capture the quiet majesty of the moment. As I wrote, I began to hear a sound, a soft, melodic whisper that seemed to rise from the mist itself. It was not a sound I could place, for it carried the cadence of a lullaby that might have been sung long ago, in a voice both tender and sorrowful. I listened, utterly captivated, as the murmur grew in intensity, before fading away like the final notes of a cherished song. In that moment, I felt as though I were standing at the threshold of two worlds, one of palpable, living beauty, and one of elusive, intangible memory. That night, Rosa and I returned to the cabin with a renewed sense of purpose. Over cups of herbal tea brewed from wild chamomile and mint we'd gathered earlier, we discussed the possibility that the Blue Ridge might be home to a restless spirit, a gentle soul trapped between life and death, whose voice echoed in the gentle murmur of the wind. Rosa spoke of local legends, of tales passed down through generations by those who believed that the mountains were alive with the voices of the past. "There's a story," she said quietly, "about a young woman who wandered these woods, her life cut tragically short by circumstances shrouded in mystery. They say her spirit lingers here, not to haunt, but to guide, to heal the wounds of those who are willing to listen." The idea resonated with me deeply, stirring both a sense of melancholy and a spark of hope. Was it possible that the spectral laughter and the whispered lullaby were the echoes of that lost soul, her presence a tender reminder that even in the face of great sorrow there exists the possibility of healing? As autumn waned into winter, the days grew shorter, and the mists hung low over the mountains like a veil. I became even more immersed in my nightly rituals, a solitary practice that involved wandering the perimeter of our property with a small recorder and a journal, capturing every nuance of the soundscape that the Blue Ridge offered. I recorded not only the soft, mournful hum of the wind, but also the subtle changes in the forest's ambiance, how the trees seemed to lean in closer during moments of quiet, how the fog would part just enough to reveal fleeting shapes that might be nothing more than the play of light, or perhaps the gentle outline of a figure watching from afar. One particularly clear winter's night, when the stars shone with an almost unbearable clarity against the cold, crisp sky, I decided to venture further than I had ever dared. With only a heavy coat, my journal, and the steady beam of a flashlight to guide me, I made my way along a narrow trail that wound its way up a steep ridge. The silence was absolute, except for the crunch of snow beneath my boots and the soft murmur of the wind. At the crest of the ridge, I paused to take in the view, a vast expanse of dark, undulating forest beneath a sky awash with stars, and below, the valley shrouded in a sea of mist. It was here that I felt the full weight of the mountain's presence, a palpable energy that seemed to press against my very soul. And then, in the midst of that profound stillness, I heard it clearly, a single crystalline note, a sound so pure and resonant that it seemed to slice through the silence like a beam of light. It was as if the mountain itself had exhaled a breath of sorrow, a final, poignant farewell to a life lost in the mists of time. I stood there, heart pounding, overwhelmed by a sense of both despair and profound connection, as though the Blue Ridge had reached out to share with me a secret that was as beautiful as it was tragic. That moment became a turning point. I returned to the cabin with a renewed resolve to embrace the mysteries that had unfolded around me. I spent the following days delving deeper into local lore, poring over old books in the small-town library and speaking with elderly residents whose eyes glimmered with memories of a time when the mountains were the keepers of ancient secrets. They told me of a legend, a tale of a young woman who had roamed these woods, her life marked by an unfulfilled promise and a quiet, unyielding sorrow. According to the stories, her spirit was said to appear on moonlit nights, her laughter a bittersweet echo that mingled with the rustle of the pines. I began to wonder if the symbols etched into the earth, the ghostly reflections in mountain streams, and the soft murmurs I had recorded were all threads of that long-forgotten story, woven together by the enduring spirit of the Blue Ridge. In the months that followed, my life in the mountains took on a measured, almost hypnotic rhythm. Mornings were spent in quiet solitude, capturing the delicate dance of dawn as it broke over the forest, while evenings were devoted to long, introspective walks beneath a sky that shifted in color and mood with the passing hours. I found that the more I listened, really listened, to the quiet, persistent voice of the land, the more I began to understand that the mountains were not empty of memory, but alive with it. Every gnarled root, every weathered rock, seemed to carry within it the whispers of those who had come before, their joys and their sorrows etched into the very fabric of the earth. Rosa remained my steadfast companion throughout this journey. With her, I learned to trust the subtle signals of nature, to recognize that a gentle shift in the wind or a fleeting shadow on the trail was not something to be feared, but a reminder that life was an intricate tapestry of both light and darkness. Together, we began to develop our own rituals, simple acts of remembrance that involved lighting small candles at dusk, gathering wildflowers to press into our journals, and even softly reciting old folk songs that seemed to rise from the depths of the forest. These rituals became a quiet celebration of the past, a way to honor the voices that had shaped this land and, in many ways, shaped who we had become. As winter slowly loosened its grip and the first hints of spring began to emerge, a tender green here, a soft blush of wildflowers there, I felt a transformation taking place within me. The spectral encounters that had once filled me with dread now seemed to carry a quiet, enduring promise. The ghostly laughter, the ethereal murmur of that ancient lullaby, the shimmering reflections in the mountain streams, all of these were not harbingers of doom, but gentle echoes of a story that was still unfolding. I came to believe that the Blue Ridge was not trying to haunt me, but to heal me, to help me reconcile with the parts of myself that had been fractured by loss and disillusionment. One chilly afternoon, as I sat by the window of our small cabin watching the sun dip behind the mountains in a burst of fiery orange and deep purple, I found myself overwhelmed by a sense of gratitude. In that moment, I realized that every strange sign, every spectral voice, every fragment of a memory that the mountains had revealed was a gift, a piece of the timeless narrative that connected me to a world far larger than my own solitary existence. I began to write with a new passion, my words flowing like a river of emotion, capturing not only the eerie beauty of the land, but also the intimate, personal journey of healing that I was undergoing. My journal, once a simple record of events, transformed into a living document, a chronicle of resilience, remembrance, and the quiet power of nature to mend even the deepest wounds. There were, of course, moments of lingering sorrow. I still woke in the night to the sound of a soft, melancholic hum that seemed to carry the weight of centuries, a sound that reminded me of the unspoken stories of the past and the inevitable passage of time. Yet, even in those moments of quiet despair, I felt a profound connection to the land, as if the mountains themselves were cradling me in their ancient embrace. I learned that healing was not about erasing pain, but about transforming it, letting it become part of a larger tapestry of memory and hope. And so, with each passing day, as the mist lifted from the forest and the gentle caress of spring warmed the cool earth, I embraced the mystery of the Blue Ridge with an open heart. Now, as I sit at my desk in the soft glow of a late afternoon, the forest outside alive with the vibrant sounds of rebirth and renewal, I reflect on the journey that brought me here. I have come to understand that the echoes I once feared were in truth invitations, inviting me to listen, to remember, and ultimately to heal. The spectral voices of the Blue Ridge, the fleeting images of a sorrowful face in the twilight, and the ancient symbols etched into the earth are not adversaries, but messengers from a time when life and memory were intertwined in an endless dance of light and shadow. I have learned to see the beauty in that dance, to let the past inform my art and my spirit without overwhelming me with its weight. Rosa, ever the gentle guide, continues to walk beside me through the verdant trails and quiet glens, her presence a reminder that the natural world holds wisdom for those who are willing to listen. Together, we have created a small sanctuary, a place where every sunrise and every whispered breeze carries the promise of a new beginning, where the pain of loss is transformed into a quiet, enduring hope. I record my days in meticulous detail, my journal a sacred ledger of the moments that have shaped me, both seen and unseen. I capture the interplay of light and shadow in my sketches, the soft cadence of nature in my notes, and the ineffable emotions that rise within me when the mountains speak in their silent, timeless language. In this secluded haven of the Blue Ridge, I have found a home not defined by the absence of sorrow, but by the profound beauty that emerges when we embrace it. I remain here not because I have all the answers, but because I have learned that sometimes the most important truths are whispered rather than shouted, felt rather than explained. And as the mist drifts slowly across the ancient pines and the sun sets in a blaze of color beyond words, I am reminded that my journey, my transformation, continues with every breath of crisp mountain air. This is my account, a story of loss and renewal, of spectral echoes and quiet hope set against the timeless backdrop of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It is a tale of stepping away from a world that had grown cold and impersonal, and finding instead a place where every sound, every shadow, every lingering whisper speaks to the heart. I have learned that in the delicate interplay between memory and myth, between the living and the lost, there exists a beauty that can heal even the deepest wounds. And so, with my pen in hand and a heart open to the mysteries of this ancient land, I continue to write, to listen, and to live, ever mindful of the quiet, enduring promise that the Blue Ridge holds for those who dare to dream beyond the limits of the everyday. I first became aware that something was not right on a night when the wind itself seemed to carry the echoes of a long-forgotten command. I had spent years buried in the regimented chaos of military life, my mind scarred by orders and memories I'd long tried to forget. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment I stepped off the cracked gravel road and into the oppressive embrace of the Allegheny National Forest, a place where nature and memory intertwined in ways I could neither anticipate nor fully understand. My name is Daniel Reed, and after the cacophony of urban life and the haunting ghosts of my past, I sought solace in a weather-beaten cabin deep in the forest, determined to reclaim a part of myself that had been shattered in the crucible of war. I remember arriving on a day that was muted and gray, the sky swollen with heavy clouds and the air biting with a chill that penetrated even the thickest of my old military coats. The cabin, a relic of a bygone era with its uneven logs and sagging roof, looked as if it had been waiting in quiet resignation for someone like me to come along. I didn't travel alone. My friend Marcus, a rugged survivalist whose steady, unflinching gaze belied a lifetime spent in the wild, accompanied me. Alongside us was Lily, a local historian with a soft-spoken manner and eyes that seemed to glisten with the accumulated lore of the forest. Together, we were an unlikely trio, each of us carrying our own burdens and secrets, drawn to the Allegheny by a shared need to escape our pasts and, perhaps, confront them on our own terms. My first night in the cabin remains etched in my memory. I lay in a creaking cot on a threadbare mattress, listening to the subtle creaks and groans of the old structure. The sound was irregular, sometimes resembling the natural settling of wood, but then, almost imperceptibly, a different sound emerged, a whisper of a voice, crisp and clear enough to send a shiver down my spine. It was as if someone had murmured a single word in a language I once knew well, a command, or perhaps a name, over the low hum of the wind. I pressed my hand to my ear, straining to catch another syllable, but the sound vanished into the dark silence of the forest. Lying there, with memories of orders and lost brothers echoing in my mind, I couldn't help but wonder if the very woods were haunted by voices of the past. The days that followed were a blur of hard work and quiet introspection. Marcus and I spent the mornings repairing the cabin, patching up gaps in the weathered logs and fortifying windows against the relentless chill. I found that the harsh winter conditions of the Allegheny tested both our physical endurance and our mental resolve. Even as I labored, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching, its ancient trees standing like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches twisting toward the sky as if in silent supplication. Lily, meanwhile, pored over old documents and faded maps in a small corner of the cabin that she'd converted into a makeshift study. With gentle determination, she would share snippets of local lore with me, her voice low and reverent as she recounted legends of a curse that had once plagued these very woods, a curse said to bind the souls of those lost in battle and tragedy to the land itself. One morning, while clearing debris from the cabin's porch after a sudden, heavy snowfall, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. Carved into one of the sturdy pine logs was a series of symbols that looked unnervingly familiar, lines and curves that resembled the insignia of my old unit, albeit distorted by time and the hand of an unknown artist. I traced the carvings with my finger, feeling the rough, weathered wood beneath my skin, and a cold dread settled over me. These marks weren't natural. They were deliberate, as if someone, or something, had etched them with intent. I quickly scribbled down my observations in a battered notebook, my military training urging me to record every detail, while my heart pounded with the sensation that the past was not so far away after all. That night, as darkness smothered the forest, and the wind carried the faint rustle of leaves like whispered secrets, I took to the perimeter of the cabin with my digital recorder in hand. I walked slowly along a narrow trail, the snow crunching beneath my boots, my breath coming out in puffs that dissolved into the cold air. The forest was eerily silent, except for the occasional creak of branches and the soft murmur of distant water. Then I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of voices, faint but unmistakably articulate, as if a long-forgotten military order was being recited by unseen lips. I froze, the recorder capturing every nuance of the sound, and, for a moment, the line between my present and the ghosts of my past blurred. I couldn't tell if it was a trick of the wind or a true echo of voices from another time, but the sensation was so vivid that it both haunted and compelled me to listen further. Over the following days, the presence in the forest grew more insistent. Marcus, whose outward composure rarely wavered, began to comment on the strange occurrences with a cautious tone. "I've been around these parts a long time, Daniel," he said one frost-bitten morning as we hauled logs together, "and I've seen plenty of odd things, but voices that sound like old orders. That's something I can't quite put my finger on." His words, though laced with the pragmatism of a man who trusted his instincts more than superstition, only deepened my own sense of foreboding. Meanwhile, Lily's research uncovered references to local legends, stories of soldiers and settlers whose lives had ended in tragedy, whose names were whispered in the wind as a reminder of forgotten promises. She told me that some believed the Allegheny held a curse, a lingering resentment of unfulfilled duty and unhealed wounds, which manifested in strange symbols and ghostly echoes. I listened intently, my mind churning with the possibility that the carvings on the pine might be more than mere coincidences, that they could be a sign of the curse's reach into my own life. I began to see patterns in the anomalies. Every night, as I patrolled the perimeter of the property with my recorder, I would note the time when the voices became most distinct, the direction from which they seemed to emanate, and the moments when the wind carried a chill that was not solely due to the falling temperature. I scribbled notes furiously in my journal, a practice I'd picked up during my military days as a way to keep track of minutiae that might later prove significant. Sometimes, as I listened back to the recordings in the pale light of dawn, I would catch snatches of words, a name, a date, a command, that resonated with my own memories of battles and lost comrades. These fragments, though disjointed and cryptic, began to form a pattern in my mind, a tapestry woven from the threads of past and present. One particularly bitter night, when the wind was so fierce that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin, I awoke in a cold sweat to the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps echoing across the wooden porch. I sat up, heart racing, and reached for the flashlight on my nightstand. With every fiber of my being, I tried to convince myself that it was only the house settling in the cold, but the sound was too rhythmic, too purposeful. I crept to the door and opened it a crack, peering out into the inky darkness. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure, a fleeting, shadowy shape that moved just beyond the reach of the light, before it melted into the night. I slammed the door shut and returned to bed, my mind a turbulent mix of fear and defiant determination. I resolved then that I would not be driven away by these spectral manifestations. Instead, I would confront them, document them, and, if possible, break the curse that seemed to have intertwined itself with my destiny. The days that followed were a study in both relentless survival and deep introspection. I spent long hours fortifying the cabin with Marcus, patching up every crack and gap with an efficiency born of years spent in combat zones. Every repair was accompanied by silent prayers and a quiet promise that I would not let the past claim me again. At the same time, I immersed myself in the historical records that Lily had helped me compile, a collection of faded newspaper clippings, handwritten letters, and old photographs that chronicled the tragic stories of those who had once walked these woods. One faded article, in particular, described a soldier who had perished under mysterious circumstances in the Allegheny decades ago, his final orders recorded as a series of cryptic numbers and names. The article hinted at a curse, a lingering resentment, perhaps, of unfulfilled duty and the heavy burden of loss. I couldn't help but feel that my own experiences, the disembodied voices, the eerie symbols, the sensation of being watched, were echoes of that same sorrow, resonating across time and space. One evening, as a dense fog rolled in from the forest and swallowed the world in a blanket of gray, I sat on the porch with Marcus and Lily. The silence was heavy with anticipation, and the only light came from a single lantern that flickered in the damp air. "We're standing on the edge of something," I said softly, my voice barely audible over the low murmur of the wind. "The forest is speaking to us in a language that we barely understand." Lily nodded, her eyes distant and reflective. "There are forces here that have been at work long before any of us arrived," she replied, her tone reverent. Marcus grunted in agreement, his steady gaze fixed on the dark trees that loomed like silent sentinels in the fog. In that moment, I felt a profound connection to the past, a sense that the curse was not merely an abstract concept, but a living, breathing force that had been waiting for someone to acknowledge its presence. I decided then that I would not run from these hauntings. I would instead embrace them as a part of my journey. I began to perform simple rituals each night, a careful, almost mechanical routine of lighting a candle at the doorway, reciting a short prayer in a voice that trembled with both resolve and uncertainty, and sprinkling salt along the thresholds in a bid to ward off malevolent forces. These acts, though humble, gave me a sense of control in an otherwise chaotic, intangible situation. They became a quiet rebellion against the darkness that threatened to engulf me, a way to assert my own strength against the spectral echoes of the past. In the midst of all this, I found unexpected solace in the camaraderie of Marcus and Lily. Marcus, whose hardened exterior belied a deep-seated pain of his own, gradually opened up about his experiences in the field. Stories of long nights spent on watch, of strange occurrences that defied explanation even to a seasoned survivalist. Lily, with her gentle wisdom, shared fragments of local lore that painted the curse in both tragic and redemptive hues. "These woods remember every loss," she told me one evening, as we pored over an old map in a dimly lit room. "And they sometimes release those memories in whispers and shadows. It's not meant to hurt you. It's meant to remind you that even in darkness, there is a chance for healing." Her words resonated deeply within me, stirring a mix of sorrow and hope that had lain dormant beneath the scars of my past. As winter gradually loosened its grip and the first hints of spring began to appear, barely perceptible buds on the ancient pines and soft green shoots pushing through the frost, I started to notice that the spectral phenomena were evolving. The eerie voices and disembodied commands, once so jarring and disruptive, had grown quieter, as if they were receding into the background, like the fading strains of a mournful melody. I began to sense a change in the atmosphere, a delicate balance between the lingering curse and the promise of renewal. My nightly patrols became less frantic, more contemplative, as I learned to distinguish between the natural sounds of the forest and the echoes of a past that still clung stubbornly to the cold air. I recorded my thoughts and observations in my journal with a new clarity, each entry a meditation on the inextricable link between memory and nature, between the scars of war and the healing power of time. One particularly serene morning, as the first soft rays of dawn filtered through a mist that hovered like a veil over the trees, I sat on the porch and reflected on the journey that had brought me to this remote, haunted place. The landscape was bathed in a quiet luminescence, the sky a delicate gradient of pastel hues, and, for a long moment, I felt a profound sense of peace. I realized then that the curse, the spectral voices, and the enigmatic symbols were not just curses to be fought. They were a part of the tapestry of this ancient land, a living reminder that our lives are interwoven with the past in ways both tragic and beautiful. In that moment of introspection, I acknowledged that my decision to remain in the Allegheny National Forest was not merely an escape from my former life, but a bold step toward embracing the totality of my existence, both the light and the darkness, the memories of battle and the quiet hope of redemption. I began to write more openly about my inner journey, my journal pages filled with reflections on the nature of loss, the inevitability of memory, and the slow, transformative power of nature. My writing took on a lyrical quality, blending the raw precision of military duty with the gentle cadence of a soul seeking solace. I wrote of the way the wind through the pines carried the voices of fallen comrades, of how the cold, unyielding stone of the cabin reminded me that even in decay there is beauty, and of the intricate interplay between the tangible scars of my past and the ethereal, almost mystical signs that the forest now offered me each night. There were nights when I would lie awake, listening to the soft hum of the wind and the distant murmur of the creek, feeling the weight of every lost moment and every unsaid goodbye. I would remember the faces of those I had lost, the orders that had once guided me, and the relentless, unyielding drive to survive in a world that often felt indifferent to pain. Yet, in the quiet solitude of those nights, I also discovered a strength I had thought forever buried, a quiet, unspoken resilience that came from facing the darkness head-on and acknowledging that every scar, every whisper from the past, was a part of who I had become. I realized that my journey in the Allegheny was far from over. The supernatural echoes and the cryptic symbols were a part of a larger narrative, a story of sacrifice, regret, and ultimately the possibility of healing. Marcus, Lily, and I continued to explore the forest together, each of us contributing our own perspective to the unfolding mystery. Marcuse's rugged pragmatism and unflinching bravery, Lily's gentle insight and deep knowledge of local lore, and my own relentless drive to understand the unseen, combined to form a bond that transcended our individual fears. We began to see the curse not as a malevolent force to be banished, but as a complex tapestry of past and present, a reminder that our histories, with all their pain and glory, are inescapable, yet can also guide us toward redemption if we dare to listen. As spring's first gentle warmth began to replace the icy grip of winter, I felt a transformation in both the land and in myself. The spectral voices had softened into a gentle murmur, like the distant hum of a lullaby that promised healing rather than despair. The cryptic carvings on the trees, once ominous symbols of a curse, now seemed like part of an ancient language that spoke of endurance and memory, a language that, if deciphered, might hold the key to unlocking the mysteries of the forest. I continued my nightly walks, each step a quiet act of defiance against the forces that had once seemed intent on dragging me back into the depths of my past. And with each dawn, as the light slowly crept over the rugged horizon, I felt more deeply that I was exactly where I needed to be. Now, as I sit in the soft glow of an early morning and prepare to document another day in this enigmatic wilderness, I feel a deep sense of acceptance. The Allegheny National Forest, with its ghostly echoes, its ancient trees, and its inexplicable mysteries, has become a part of me, a living reminder that our past is never truly gone, but a persistent, enduring force that can guide us toward healing if we are brave enough to confront it. I choose to remain here, not out of stubbornness or despair, but out of a newfound understanding that the ghosts of my past and the mysteries of these woods are intertwined with my own journey, a journey of redemption, resilience, and ultimately hope. This is my account, a chronicle of a life redefined in the depths of an ancient forest, where every whisper of wind and every flicker of light is a testament to the enduring power of memory, the scars of battle, and the quiet, unyielding promise of healing. I remain in the Allegheny not because the darkness has vanished, but because I have learned to see in it the delicate balance of sorrow and beauty, a balance that, in its own mysterious way, leads to the light of a new dawn. The day the water called to me, I swear, began with a strange, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath my feet. I still remember the humid July afternoon when I first set eyes on Lake Lanier, a vast expanse of water that lay like a dark, reflective mirror under a sky heavy with unspoken storms. My name is Rebecca Cole, and after a long career as a nurse in the relentless corridors of urban hospitals, I finally mustered the courage to leave behind the sterile chaos and seek refuge in a simpler, quieter life. I had envisioned a tranquil retreat by the lake, a modest, weathered cabin where I might tend a small garden, write in my journal without interruption, and perhaps mend a heart that had been battered by years of grief and constant rush. Yet, from the moment I arrived, I sensed that Lake Lanier was not merely a place of natural beauty. It carried with it a burden of sorrow and mystery that defied simple explanation. I drove the long, winding roads out of Atlanta with little more than a battered suitcase, a handful of well-worn books, and a desperate need to be alone with my thoughts. The further I ventured into the countryside, the more the modern world receded into a distant memory, a world of flickering screens, incessant phone calls, and the relentless hum of machinery. By the time I reached the lake, the landscape had transformed into a dreamlike vision of swaying cypress trees, moss-draped trunks, and a shimmering waterline that blurred the boundary between earth and sky. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of damp vegetation mingling with the salt of unseen tears. In that moment, I realized that I was entering a realm where nature was alive with secrets, and every ripple on the water held a story waiting to be told. The cabin itself was a relic of bygone days, a small, creaking structure with peeling white paint and a sagging porch that overlooked the water like a sentinel of memories. I had rented it from a kindly old man who warned me, in a voice as gravelly as the worn pavement, that the lake was cursed, and that its waters had claimed many souls over the decades. His words, though meant as folklore to entertain a curious newcomer, clung to me as I stepped inside the dim, cool interior. The single room was sparsely furnished, a threadbare sofa, a rickety table, and a single flickering lamp that cast uneven shadows on the walls. Outside, the water lay still and dark, yet I could feel an inexplicable pull coming from its depths, as if it were beckoning me to peer beyond the surface and into a realm of forgotten sorrow. My first few days were a blend of practical adjustments and quiet observations. I set about making the cabin livable, patching up broken window frames, repairing a leaky door, and rigging a makeshift rainwater collection system that would hopefully suffice until I could find more permanent solutions. In the meantime, I spent my mornings on the small wooden dock that jutted into the lake, letting my fingers trail over the water's cool surface as I scribbled down notes in my journal. I recorded the mundane details, the way the sunlight refracted through a fine mist on the water, the rhythm of the gentle lapping of waves, and the muted chorus of cicadas and distant bird calls. But even as I documented these everyday wonders, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else beneath the surface, a silent, sorrowful energy that pulsed with each ripple. One sweltering afternoon, while I was gathering wild mint near the water's edge, I noticed an odd, almost imperceptible shimmer on the lake. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, the sun dancing off the water in a fleeting moment of brilliance. But then I saw it clearly, a dark, spectral figure drifting just beneath the surface, its outline shifting and elusive as if made of smoke and water. My heart pounded as I stood frozen in place, unable to tear my eyes away. I stumbled back, mind racing with questions. Had I really seen a ghost, or was it merely a trick of my exhausted eyes, the product of a mind longing for answers in a strange new world? I spent the rest of the day with my senses heightened, every rustle of the leaves, every ripple in the water, taking on an ominous significance. That night, as darkness settled over the lake like a shroud, I lay awake in the cramped confines of the cabin. The hum of the old refrigerator and the creaks of the weathered wood provided a kind of eerie soundtrack to my thoughts. Then, amid the chorus of familiar sounds, I heard something new, a soft, almost musical whisper that seemed to come from outside, mingling with the rustling wind. I strained my ears, trying to discern words, but all I could catch was a gentle, sorrowful melody that spoke of longing and loss. The sound was transient, yet it left a lingering impression, a feeling that the water itself was mourning, that beneath the calm surface lay the echo of countless tragedies. I scribbled down my impressions feverishly, the words flowing like the tears I could no longer hold back. Days turned into weeks, and as I settled into the rhythm of life by Lake Lanier, the supernatural occurrences became impossible to ignore. Each night, I found myself drawn to the dock, recorder in hand, capturing the soft murmurs of the lake and the occasional, inexplicable cry that rose above the gentle lapping of water. I would listen to these recordings in the pale light of dawn, my mind trying desperately to piece together the fragmented sounds. There were moments when I distinctly heard a name, a single, mournful syllable that resonated with a deep sense of history, as if the water were calling out to a soul long lost. I couldn't tell if it was the echo of a drowned spirit or a manifestation of my own grief, but the sound sent a shiver through me and compelled me to write, to document every detail in my journal. At the local market in the small town that served as the gateway to the lake, I met Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman with silver hair and eyes that sparkled with a mixture of sorrow and knowing. Over a cup of lukewarm tea in the dim back room of the market, she told me stories of the lake that sounded like fragments of a half-remembered dream. "They say the water remembers every tear," she whispered, leaning in so that only I could hear, "and that on nights when the wind is soft and the air is still, you might hear the cries of those who were lost to these waters. There was a young woman, dear, whose heart broke one stormy night, and she drowned in the depths, leaving behind a sorrow that still echoes in the waves. Her words struck a chord deep within me, and I couldn't help but feel that the spectral figure I had seen, the ghostly reflections and the mournful sounds were all part of a tragic tapestry woven long ago. Back at the cabin, the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing day. The isolation that I had once welcomed with open arms now began to feel oppressive, as if the lake were pressing in, demanding that its sorrow be acknowledged. I noticed that even the wildlife seemed subdued. Birds flew lower, their songs quieter, as if in mourning. The water itself was less vibrant, its surface darkened by an unseen melancholy. I began to perform simple rituals, small acts of reverence that I hoped might appease the restless energy of the lake. Each evening, before the sun sank below the horizon, I would walk along the dock, leaving a small token, perhaps a smooth stone or a sprig of wildflower, on the water's edge, whispering a quiet prayer for the souls that I felt were trapped beneath the surface. I wasn't sure if these acts had any power at all, but they brought me a fragile sense of comfort, a feeling that I was doing something, anything, to bridge the gap between the living and the lost. One night remains etched in my memory with the clarity of a vivid dream. The sky was overcast with heavy clouds, and a gentle rain began to fall, casting a silvery sheen over the lake. I sat on the porch, wrapped in a worn quilt, the soft, rhythmic murmur of the water a constant companion. As I sipped my tea, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, a clear, mournful cry that rose above the steady patter of rain, filled with an anguish so deep it seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears, and I reached for my recorder with trembling hands. The cry, once captured, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a lament that spoke of unimaginable loss, of a love snuffed out by the cruel hand of fate. I listened repeatedly to that recording, each playback stirring up emotions I had long buried, emotions that left me both heartbroken and inexplicably drawn to the mystery of the lake. In the following days, I began to piece together fragments of the story that Mrs. Jenkins had shared. I learned that decades ago, a young woman named Evelyn Moore had drowned in the very waters of Lake Lanier during a violent storm. Her life cut tragically short and her memory shrouded in mystery. The accounts were fragmented and tinged with local superstition, a tale of unrequited love, of a family cursed by sorrow, and of a spirit doomed to wander the waters in search of a solace that had eluded her in life. I couldn't help but see a parallel between her story and my own aching heart. In the quiet solitude of the cabin, I began to feel that Evelyn's sorrow was not just a relic of the past, but an echo that resonated in the very air I breathed, a reminder that the lake, in its enigmatic beauty, held within it the power to both destroy and heal. Driven by a need to understand and, perhaps, to heal, I began a more deliberate investigation into the mysteries of Lake Lanier. Every evening, after the rituals on the dock, I sat by my small desk inside the cabin and wrote long, flowing entries in my journal. I described in painstaking detail every sound, every flicker of light, every shadow that danced on the water's surface. I recorded the exact times the spectral cry rose, the shifting patterns of the water when the moon was hidden behind clouds, and even the peculiar scent that sometimes wafted through the open window, a fragrance of wet earth, wildflowers, and something faintly reminiscent of tears. I scoured local archives in the nearby town, piecing together old newspaper clippings and interviewing residents who remembered the old legends. With every new detail, the picture of Evelyn Moore grew clearer and yet more tragic, a young woman whose life had been full of promise until the capricious cruelty of a storm stole her away, leaving behind a legacy of heartache that the lake had absorbed like a deep, unhealed wound. My nights became a meditative vigil, an exercise in balancing fear with a desperate hope for redemption. I would sit on the dock with my recorder and listen to the whispers of the water, sometimes hearing only the steady hum of nature, other times catching fleeting fragments of a voice, a whisper of Evelyn that sent a chill down my spine. I began to experiment with different ways to capture the phenomenon, repositioning the recorder, setting up a rudimentary microphone array along the shore, even trying to record video in the hope that I might catch a glimpse of a spectral figure moving through the mist. Although many of these attempts yielded only grainy images and indecipherable sounds, each piece of evidence fueled my determination to understand the curse that haunted this place. Through it all, my husband James, whose pragmatic nature had initially kept him at a distance from my more spectral experiences, slowly began to show signs of concern, and, ultimately, a quiet acceptance of the mystery. He would sometimes join me on the porch at dawn, staring out at the still, dark water, with eyes that betrayed a sense of wonder and sorrow. "It's as if the lake holds every tear that's ever been shed," he remarked one morning, his voice barely above a whisper. His words, coming from a man who had spent his life anchored in reason, struck a chord within me. I realized that the curse of Lake Lanier was not something to be feared or fought against, but rather something to be acknowledged and understood, a part of the natural order that bound the past and the present together in an unbreakable embrace. As the seasons shifted, and the heavy heat of summer gave way to the gentler touch of autumn, I began to see a transformation in myself. The spectral images and ghostly cries, once sources of fear and sleepless nights, became a quiet presence that imbued my daily life with a deeper sense of meaning. I found that by embracing the sorrow of the past, I could begin to heal the wounds that had long festered in the hidden corners of my heart. My journal entries took on a lyrical quality, blending raw emotion with the clinical detail of a researcher determined to document every nuance of this strange, haunted place. I wrote of the way the lake, in its silent grandeur, reminded me that every loss leaves a mark, and that sometimes the act of remembering is the first step toward redemption. There were evenings, too, when the mysteries of the lake would feel almost tender, a soft caress against the chill of the night. On one such evening, as the first stars began to twinkle in a sky cleared of storm clouds, I sat on the dock with my journal open on my lap. The water was calm and dark, and for a long moment I felt as if I were holding my breath, waiting for something to reveal itself. And then I heard it, a gentle, wistful murmur that rose from the depths, a single word carried on the wind. Evelyn. It was not a scream, nor was it a plea. It was a quiet invocation, a soft reminder that the memory of the past was never truly lost. I closed my eyes and allowed the sound to wash over me, feeling the weight of centuries settle gently upon my shoulders. And in that moment, I knew that my journey here was not merely about unraveling a curse, but about finding a way to honor the lives that had been claimed by this haunted water. Over the ensuing months, I learned to live with the curse as a part of my everyday existence. I continued my nightly rituals, recording the subtle symphony of the lake, and writing with a fervor that was both cathartic and transformative. I began to capture the beauty in the melancholy, the way the water's surface, in the soft light of early dawn, reflected not just the sky, but the sorrow and the hope of 1,000 lost souls. I discovered that by acknowledging the ghostly echoes, by accepting that every ripple was a memory, I could begin to transform my own grief into a quiet, resilient strength. My paintings, which I had once reserved for vibrant, lively landscapes, took on a new, haunting quality, each brush stroke imbued with the deep, reflective hues of twilight and the soft shimmer of spectral light. James and I found a new rhythm together, one defined not by the frenetic pace of our past lives, but by the gentle, measured cadence of the lake's eternal song. We spent our mornings on the porch, sharing cups of coffee as we watched the mist rise from the water, and our evenings in quiet conversation about the nature of memory and loss. Though our home was far removed from the conveniences of modern life, it was filled with a sense of purpose and beauty that transcended the ordinary, a sanctuary where the past was honored and the future held the promise of healing. Now, as I sit here in the fading light of an autumn afternoon, the lake stretching out before me in an endless, glimmering expanse, I feel an overwhelming gratitude for the path that led me to this place. I have come to understand that the curse of Lake Lanier is not a malevolent force to be vanquished, but a bittersweet legacy, a reminder that every life, no matter how tragic, leaves behind echoes that resonate through time. Each recording I review, each entry in my journal, is a testament to the enduring power of memory and the way that even the most sorrowful stories can give rise to new hope. This is my account, a chronicle of my journey from the sterile halls of urban hospitals to the haunted, shimmering shores of Lake Lanier. It is a story of loss and redemption, of the spectral voices that call out from the depths, and the quiet, steadfast determination to listen, to remember, and ultimately to heal. I remain here by the cursed waters, not because I have all the answers, but because I have learned that the truth is often found in the delicate interplay of light and shadow, in the gentle murmur of a memory that refuses to fade. And so, with each passing day, as I watch the sun rise over the lake and paint the sky in hues of hope and melancholy, I carry with me the belief that even the darkest curses can be transformed into a legacy of healing, a legacy that, like the eternal rhythm of the water, endures long after the echoes of sorrow have faded into the night. The morning I arrived at Silver Springs felt less like a beginning and more like an awakening from a long, restless sleep. I stepped off the worn bus and into a humid embrace that clung to my skin as if it were a living thing, a welcome contrast to the sterile clamor I'd left behind. My name is Tara Boone, and after years of chasing stories in the concrete jungles of modern cities, I was desperate to find solace in nature. Somewhere the relentless pace of urban life could be replaced by the unhurried cadence of the wild. Silver Springs, with its crystal-clear waters and lush subtropical landscapes, beckoned me like a whispered promise. The moment I caught my first glimpse of the springs, water so pure it looked almost unreal, fringed by verdant foliage and dancing in the bright Florida sun, I sensed that this place held secrets. I rented a small, secluded cabin on the edge of the springs, a humble structure of weathered wood and chipped white paint that seemed to exist both in and out of time. I settled into the cabin with a cautious optimism that bordered on trepidation. The humidity was immediate and intense, a constant reminder that I was no longer in a climate governed by concrete and air conditioning, but in one ruled by nature's own rhythms. I spent the first few days acclimating to my surroundings, learning to silence the incessant buzz of cicadas, swatting away persistent insects, and listening to the murmur of water that ran deep through the springs. I was joined by my longtime friend Carter, a practical soul whose quiet humor and deep understanding of natural remedies provided a steady counterpoint to my own fervent need for mystery and meaning. Occasionally, we would consult with Marisol, a local indigenous elder, whose presence seemed to bridge the gap between the modern and the ancient. Her weathered hands and gentle eyes carried the weight of generations, and her whispered stories were like incantations that hinted at hidden truths. I recall my first evening vividly. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a tangerine afterglow that slowly yielded to the deep indigo of twilight. I sat on the rickety porch, the sound of water lapping gently against the stone steps mingling with the rustle of palm fronds. The air was thick with the scent of salt and damp earth, and, as the darkness deepened, I began to notice an eerie stillness settling over the springs. I turned on a small lantern and reached for my journal, determined to capture every sensation. That's when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic chanting, like an ancient melody woven into the humid night. At first, I assumed it was just the wind playing tricks among the trees, but as the chanting persisted, with a cadence that felt deliberate and measured, I realized I wasn't imagining things. The sound seemed to rise from the heart of the springs themselves, carrying an echo of something long forgotten. I jotted down every detail, my pen scratching fervently against the pages, as if by recording it, I might somehow understand what the water was trying to say. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in the rhythms of this new life. Mornings were a slow, deliberate ritual. I'd rise before dawn, stepping outside onto a small wooden dock that stretched over the still, shimmering water. I'd watch as the first rays of sunlight broke through a veil of mist, transforming the lake into a luminous expanse of silver and gold. It was during these quiet hours that I began to notice peculiarities that defied simple explanation. Once, as I sat quietly with my thoughts, I saw a reflection in the water that wasn't my own, a fleeting, shadowy figure gliding just beneath the surface, its contours indistinct and almost dreamlike. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of light or an overactive imagination fueled by loneliness. But the sight lingered in my mind long after the image had vanished, a silent invitation to look deeper. Carter, ever the skeptic, would sometimes smile at my wide-eyed wonder. "You're letting the beauty get to you, Tara," he'd say in his measured tone, though I knew he, too, was captivated by the mystery. He had come to Silver Springs in search of a fresh start, and, like me, had discovered that the land here was not simply a backdrop, but a living presence that spoke in hushed tones. His practical approach, gathering botanical remedies to fend off the relentless humidity, setting up basic filtration systems to ensure clean water, contrasted with my own tendency to dwell on the enigmatic. Still, we found common ground in our shared need to understand our new home. It wasn't long before the supernatural began to manifest in small, unmistakable ways. One sultry night, as I sat on the porch recording the ambient sounds with my digital recorder, I caught something odd in the background, a soft, almost rhythmic pulse, like the beating of a heart that wasn't entirely my own. I replayed the recording in the quiet of the early morning light, the sound repeating in a slow, steady cadence that sent chills up my spine. I began to wonder if the water carried the echoes of a long-lost ritual, if perhaps the very springs were imbued with the energy of ancient ceremonies, performed to honor or appease unseen forces. I made detailed notes, my hand trembling with both fear and anticipation as I tried to piece together the significance of these sounds. Then came the nights when the atmosphere turned almost tangible with mystery. The air would grow still, as if the world were holding its breath, and I'd see swirling mists rise off the surface of the water in shapes that hinted at something human, a fleeting image of a woman with sorrowful eyes, her form dissolving into the darkness almost as quickly as it appeared. I once witnessed, for only a moment, what seemed like a spectral figure, her eyes reflecting a centuries-old sadness that pierced me through the veil of time. I couldn't shake the image, no matter how hard I tried. It was as if the spirit of the place had reached out to me, trying to share its grief, its hidden stories. I recorded these encounters meticulously, my journal filling with sketches and frantic descriptions of every ghostly reflection, and every faint, rhythmic chant that drifted over the water on still nights. My encounters with the uncanny deepened as I began to engage with Marisol, the indigenous elder whose wisdom was as timeless as the springs themselves. I visited her in a small, weathered home on the outskirts of town, where the air was scented with burning sage and the walls were lined with ancestral photos. Marisol spoke to me in hushed tones, her voice resonating with a calm authority that belied the deep mysteries of her past. "The spirits of Silver Springs are not here to harm you," she said slowly, "but to remind you of the balance between nature and memory. They are messengers, carrying the wisdom of our ancestors and the lessons of loss." She taught me protective chants, words that had been passed down through generations, and explained that the rhythmic hums and the shifting mists were signs that the boundary between the physical and the spiritual was thinner here than in most places. I listened intently, my heart both heavy and hopeful, as I absorbed her teachings like a lifeline thrown into the turbulent waters of my own grief. As the weeks melted into months, I found that living off-grid in this subtropical haven was a constant interplay between beauty and hardship. The high humidity was relentless, clinging to everything like a wet shroud. Insects swarmed in the stillness of the night, their persistent buzzing a reminder of nature's unyielding persistence, and the threat of sudden storms and floods loomed over our fragile existence like a dark promise. Yet, amidst these challenges, I discovered a quiet resilience, a deep, enduring connection to the land that transcended the physical hardships. Every evening, as the sun set in a blaze of tangerine and crimson, I would sit on the dock with my recorder and my journal, watching as the clear waters of Silver Springs transformed into a living tapestry of light and shadow. I became a careful observer of nature's subtle signals, the way the water rippled in response to the slightest breeze, the soft cadence of an ancient chant that seemed to rise from the depths of the springs, and the transient glimmers of figures that appeared in the swirling mists. One night, after a particularly heavy downpour had left the air thick with a damp, metallic tang, I experienced an encounter that changed everything. I had been sitting on the porch, wrapped in a faded blanket, and lost in the soft hum of the night when I heard it, a low, rhythmic chanting that seemed to emanate from the very center of the springs. It was not a song in the conventional sense, but a series of syllables, ancient and fluid, that resonated with the kind of melancholy I had only ever felt in my dreams. I rose with a sense of both dread and determination, and followed the sound, my recorder clutched tightly in my hand until I reached a narrow path that led down to the water's edge. There, beneath a canopy of draping Spanish moss and in the soft glow of a hidden moon, I saw her. a spectral woman, shimmering faintly like a mirage, her eyes deep pools of sorrow that seemed to hold centuries of longing. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there in silence, my heart pounding as if in defiance of time. I reached out as if to touch her, but my hand passed through the cool, moist air with nothing but the lingering trace of a chill that ran to my very core. The vision faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind a profound emptiness and a torrent of unspoken questions. I returned to the cabin with trembling hands and a mind racing with possibilities. Was she the messenger Marisol had spoken of, a symbol of ancient loss and enduring hope? Or was she a fragment of my own shattered heart, manifesting in the mystical embrace of the springs? In the days that followed, I became increasingly absorbed in the mystery. I combed through local archives, gathered newspaper clippings recounting tragic drownings and whispered legends, and spent long hours conversing with Marisol and other locals who carried the weight of these old stories. I learned that Silver Springs had long been considered a place where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural blurred, a place where the spirits of the past lingered in the crystal-clear waters and in the rustling of the palms. The more I learned, the more I began to see the spectral occurrences not as malevolent hauntings, but as poignant echoes of lives once lived and loves lost, a legacy of sorrow and resilience that had imprinted itself on the very soul of the springs. My nights became a tapestry of rituals and quiet reflection. Each evening, before darkness fell completely, I would walk to the water's edge and leave a small token, a smooth stone, a sprig of wild rosemary, or even a handwritten note, carefully placed as an offering to the restless spirit I had come to sense so profoundly. I recited protective chants that Marisol had taught me, her words a soothing blend of ancient language and personal prayer, intended to honor the past while inviting healing into the present. These acts, simple and humble as they were, gave me a sense of connection, a feeling that I was part of a larger, ongoing story that transcended my own grief and loneliness. Over time, the unexplained phenomena began to weave themselves into the fabric of my daily life. I became adept at discerning the subtle signals of the springs, the way the water would shimmer with a spectral light on certain nights, the fleeting sound of soft chanting that seemed to rise from the depths, the sudden appearance of swirling mists that hinted at a presence beyond the physical. I recorded everything with a diligence that was both clinical and deeply emotional. My journal, a repository of every sensation, every fragment of sound, every brush with the unknown. With each new entry, I felt myself healing, the raw edges of my grief softening as I embraced the mystery before me. James, my ever-practical husband, watched these developments with a mix of concern and quiet fascination. Though he had initially been skeptical, wary of the idea that I was being consumed by ghost stories and old legends, he eventually came to appreciate the subtle transformation taking place. On mornings when he joined me on the dock, we would sit in companionable silence, our shared glances conveying a mutual understanding that something ineffable was at work. "I can't explain it, Tara," he once said softly as he looked out over the shimmering water. "But sometimes I feel as if the lake carries the weight of every lost soul, every tear shed over forgotten tragedies. It's as if this place is a keeper of memories, a reminder that even the deepest sorrows can give rise to something beautiful." His words, spoken in the quiet intimacy of a shared sunrise, reinforced my belief that the spirits of Silver Springs were not there to haunt us, but to guide us, to teach us that healing often comes from the acceptance of loss, from the acknowledgement of what once was. As the months passed, my life at Silver Springs transformed from one of reluctant curiosity into a deep, abiding communion with the land and its spectral inhabitants. I continued to document every haunting detail with my recorder, my camera, and my journal. My entries a blend of scientific observation and raw, unguarded emotion. I painted with a fervor that was both cathartic and transformative, capturing on canvas the delicate interplay of light, water, and shadow, the very essence of a place where sorrow and hope coexisted in fragile harmony. The ghostly figures I recorded, the spectral murmurs that rose above the gentle lapping of the water, and the recurring visions of a sorrowful woman became threads in the tapestry of my existence, a tapestry woven from the memories of the past and the promise of healing for the future. There were moments of quiet triumph amid the mystery. One evening, after a day of gathering notes and recording the subtle sounds of the night, I found myself sitting on the dock at twilight with a sense of serene acceptance. The water lay calm and dark before me, reflecting the soft blush of the setting sun. I closed my eyes and listened, not for ghostly voices, but for the heartbeat of the lake itself, the steady, rhythmic pulse that seemed to connect every living thing in this strange, wondrous place. In that moment, I felt as though the spirit I had long sensed was there with me, a quiet presence that offered both comfort and a reminder of the enduring power of memory. I whispered a quiet prayer into the cool evening air, a promise to honor the past and to live each day with the gratitude of a soul that had finally found its home. Now, as I sit at my battered desk in the quiet sanctuary of our lakeside cabin, the gentle hum of Silver Springs filling the space with a mysterious lullaby, I reflect on the journey that brought me here. I have learned that the spectral echoes of this place are not something to be feared or fought against. They are an intrinsic part of the landscape, a living, breathing testament to the beauty and sorrow of life. The water, with its clear, reflective surface, holds within it the memories of those who have passed on, and every ripple is a reminder that even in loss, there is continuity, there is resilience. I choose to remain at Silver Springs not because I have found all the answers, but because I have come to believe that the spirits here are messengers, bearers of a legacy that teaches us about the impermanence of pain and the possibility of healing. Every day, I rise with the hope that the lake will reveal a new secret, that every whispered chant in the night and every fleeting glimpse of a spectral figure will guide me further along a path of redemption and renewal. My recordings, my journal entries, my paintings, all are part of a conversation with the past, an ongoing dialogue between the living and the lost. This is my account, a chronicle of a journey from the sterile corridors of urban hospitals to the haunted, shimmering shores of Silver Springs, where every wave, every breeze, and every ghostly echo speaks to the enduring power of memory and the quiet promise of healing. In embracing the sorrow that lingers beneath the surface, I have found not only a refuge from the relentless pace of modern life, but also a deeper understanding of myself, a realization that every loss leaves behind a legacy, and that by honoring that legacy, we can transform our pain into something beautiful and enduring. And so I remain here, on this shore, where the water sings of forgotten tragedies and tender hope, determined to listen, to record, and to honor the voices of the past. Each day is a step further into the mystery, a step toward reconciling with the shadows that have long haunted my heart. In the gentle murmur of the lake and the soft glow of a new dawn, I have discovered that even the darkest curses can yield to the light of remembrance, and that true healing comes from embracing the full spectrum of our human experience. I continue to write, to paint, and to dream in the quiet company of Silver Springs, ever grateful for the chance to transform sorrow into a legacy of hope, a legacy that, like the eternal rhythm of the water, endures long after the echoes have faded into the night. My name is Ben Carter, and I sought refuge in a place where history lived in every ripple of water and every creak of ancient wood. The farmhouse itself, with its peeling white siding and sagging roof, looked as if it had been carved out of a time long forgotten, standing stubbornly against the inexorable flow of time and the murmur of the river that wound its way past like a slow, eternal storyteller. The day I first arrived, the air was thick with a humid mist that rose off the river like breath, and the distant sound of oars slicing through the water echoed faintly, though no boat was visible. I stepped from the taxi with a hesitant sort of reverence, as if I were entering a sacred space. Laura, my partner, a quiet, sensitive photographer with an eye for the uncanny, had arrived earlier, and I found her already wandering the property with her camera slung casually over her shoulder. Her eyes, dark and thoughtful, seemed to drink in every detail of the landscape, the gently lapping water, the slow dance of autumn leaves along the banks, the weathered stones on which ancient symbols were faintly etched. It was as if the river itself was inviting her to capture its many moods. I couldn't help but feel that our decision to come here was not merely an escape, but an entry into a world where the past was still vividly present. During my first few days at the farmhouse, I devoted myself to the rhythms of rural life. Mornings began before dawn, when the world was still draped in a delicate haze and the river shimmered under the light of a timid sunrise. I would step outside onto the creaking wooden porch with a cup of strong coffee, inhaling the crisp, earthy air mingled with a trace of river mist. Each morning, as the light slowly unveiled the landscape, a mosaic of dense forests, rolling hills, and the ever-murmuring water, I scribbled my impressions in my journal. I wrote about the interplay of shadow and light on the water's surface, the gentle lapping of waves that seemed to whisper forgotten names, and the feeling of standing at the intersection of memory and the present. Even as I busied myself with the practical tasks of settling into the farmhouse, patching up broken windows, repairing the old heating system, and sorting through the relics left behind by previous occupants, I could not shake the sense that I was being watched by something unseen. In the evenings, when the day's labor gave way to a contemplative quiet, I would sit with Laura in the parlor, the soft glow of an oil lamp casting long shadows against the faded wallpaper. We often talked in hushed tones about the local history that I had begun to uncover from old newspapers and faded photographs in the town library. Laura would show me photographs she had taken on our morning walks, ghostly images of colonial figures appearing in the periphery of the frame, hints of faces peering out from behind gnarled trees, and mysterious, weathered symbols carved into river stones that glowed faintly under the moonlight. It was as if the land itself was trying to share its story, layer by cryptic layer. One particularly crisp morning, I was walking along the riverbank with my camera and notebook when I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. There, half buried in the silt along a rocky outcrop, were markings that appeared to be an archaic script. The characters, worn by time yet unmistakably deliberate, formed a sequence that I could not decipher. A message, perhaps, left by early settlers, or even by the indigenous people who once revered this river as sacred. I knelt beside the markings, brushing away a few droplets of water and earth, and felt a chill that went beyond the morning cold. I carefully copied the symbols into my journal, my hand trembling slightly as I recorded each curve and line. In that moment, I felt an almost magnetic pull, a sense that the river was speaking to me, urging me to remember a past that had been lost to time. My nights became a tapestry of quiet observation and haunting experiences. After dinner, when the house grew silent and the wind carried the gentle murmur of the river into every crevice of the old farmhouse, I would often retreat to the porch with my recorder. I would sit for hours, listening intently to the ambient sounds, the soft rustling of the trees, the distant call of an owl, and sometimes, if I was quiet enough, the gentle sound of what seemed like whispered voices carried on the breeze. There were moments when I distinctly heard what might have been an old colonial hymn, a series of solemn notes that stirred a deep, inexplicable sorrow within me. I would replay the recordings in the dim light of the early morning, each playback intensifying the mystery of the voices that seemed to echo across the river. In the midst of this unfolding enigma, I often visited Miss Perkins, the local librarian who had become an unexpected guide into the past. Her small, cluttered office was filled with dusty volumes of colonial records, personal diaries of early settlers, and faded maps of the region. Over cups of lukewarm tea, she recounted the legends of the Connecticut River, stories of shipwrecks, lost love, and of ghostly apparitions that wandered the banks long after their time. "They say," she would say in a hushed tone, "that the river carries the souls of those who have passed on, whispering their final words to anyone who is willing to listen." Her words resonated with the experiences I was gathering, each tale a fragment of a larger, somber mosaic of history. I asked her about the markings I had found, and she nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a secret knowledge. "There's an old legend about a group of settlers who carved their vows into the stones along the river," she explained. "They believed that by leaving these marks, they could bind themselves to the land forever, ensuring that their memory would endure through the ages. Perhaps what you see here is a remnant of that ancient promise." That idea haunted me. The notion that our lives, no matter how brief, were destined to be intertwined with the land and its inexhaustible memory. Each time I gazed out at the dark, reflective water of the river, I felt as though I were staring into a mirror that revealed not only the present, but also the layers of history embedded within. There were evenings when the river appeared to shimmer with a ghostly light, and in that light I caught fleeting glimpses of figures, perhaps settlers in old-fashioned garb, their faces wistful and melancholy, silently watching as the world around them changed beyond recognition. My partner Laura, who had captured many of these eerie images with her camera, became both my confidant and my co-investigator. We spent countless hours reviewing photographs and recordings, trying to discern patterns in the apparitions and the sounds that haunted our nights. One photograph, taken on a foggy morning, showed what appeared to be a spectral figure standing near the water, a figure with the unmistakable air of someone from another era, her eyes deep and sorrowful, as if burdened by the weight of lost dreams. Laura's expression when she saw it was a mixture of awe and grief, as though the image spoke to her on a deeply personal level. "It's like she's trying to tell us something," she would murmur, her voice soft as the dawn. "Like she wants us to remember that the past isn't dead. It lives here, in every ripple of the river, in every whisper of the wind." Her words, gentle and evocative, lent a new dimension to my own burgeoning belief that the ghostly echoes of the Connecticut River were not malevolent, but tragic relics of a bygone era. I began to experiment with simple rituals, not out of superstition, but as a way to pay homage to the restless spirits I sensed along the riverbank. Each evening, before darkness claimed the landscape, I would light a small candle by the window, its flickering flame a symbol of remembrance and hope. I would take a vial of salt water, a keepsake from an old family heirloom, and sprinkle it along the threshold of the farmhouse, reciting a short prayer that Miss Perkins had once taught me, a prayer meant to honor the memories of those who had gone before. The rituals brought me a measure of peace, a sense that I was part of a continuum, a living link in the unbroken chain of memory that stretched back through the ages. As the seasons changed, and the biting chill of winter gave way to the softer touch of early spring, the mysteries along the Connecticut River took on a more subtle, introspective quality. The ghostly voices I once recorded became softer, as if the river itself were easing its mournful lament. The spectral figures in Laura's photographs grew fainter, more like impressions in the morning fog rather than vivid apparitions. Yet, the sense of history and loss remained as palpable as ever. I spent many long afternoons in quiet contemplation on the porch, gazing at the river as it meandered lazily by, its surface reflecting a tapestry of blue and silver. In those moments, I felt that I was part of something larger than myself, a living archive of the past, where every whisper of the water was a memory, and every ripple carried the weight of countless untold stories. There were nights, too, when the isolation and the soft, persistent murmur of the river stirred deep emotions in me. I would lie awake in bed, the silence of the farmhouse broken only by the occasional creak of old wood and the distant, almost inaudible sigh of the river, and I would reflect on the choices that had brought me here. I remembered the cacophony of New York City, the endless noise, the relentless pressure of deadlines, the sterile, cold corridors of the hospital, and I marveled at how different life could be in a place where time seemed to move with the measured, patient pulse of the water. In those quiet hours, I felt the bittersweet weight of regret and longing, but also a tender hope that, by embracing the past, I could forge a path toward healing. One morning, after a particularly reflective night of writing in my journal by the light of a single candle, I took a long walk along the riverbank, accompanied by Laura. The air was cool and crisp, the ground damp from an overnight rain that had left the world washed in a soft, gray light. We walked in companionable silence, our footsteps echoing gently on the worn path, until we reached a spot where the river narrowed and the water flowed more swiftly. It was there, among smooth river stones polished by centuries of current, that I noticed something extraordinary. A series of ancient symbols carved into a large boulder, glowing faintly in the pale morning light. The markings were unmistakably archaic, their curves and lines speaking of a language lost to time. I felt an inexplicable tug in my heart, as if the boulder was a relic of a civilization that had once thrived along these banks, and as if it carried within it the secrets of love, loss, and redemption. I knelt and traced the symbols with trembling fingers, and, for a moment, the murmur of the river seemed to swell into a chorus of voices, each ripple a syllable in a long-forgotten hymn. In the following weeks, I became increasingly devoted to uncovering the layers of history that lay hidden along the Connecticut River. I spent my days sifting through old records at the local library, poring over maps and diaries that chronicled the lives of early settlers, battles fought on these very banks, and the tragic fates of those claimed by the river's relentless current. Mrs. Perkins, the kindly librarian with a passion for colonial ghost stories, became an invaluable resource, her gentle explanations and detailed recollections painting a picture of a bygone era filled with both hope and despair. Through her, I learned of a shipwreck that had occurred centuries ago, of families torn apart by tragedy, and of spectral figures said to wander the riverbank in search of lost loved ones. The stories resonated with me, stirring a profound empathy for the souls who had left their mark on the landscape, and they lent a deeper meaning to the ghostly encounters I continued to record. As spring unfurled its tender blossoms and the river sparkled in the fresh light of a new season, I found that my initial fear had given way to a cautious acceptance, a willingness to listen to the whispers of the past without trying to force them into a framework of modern understanding. Every day, as I rose with the sun and stepped onto the porch to gaze at the shimmering water, I felt that I was part of an ongoing conversation between the living and the dead. The ghostly echoes that had once unsettled me now served as a reminder of the impermanence of life and the enduring power of memory. Laura's photographs, once a source of inexplicable fear, had transformed into delicate, evocative images that captured the soulful interplay of light, water, and history. Each image was a testament to the beauty that could be found even in the sorrow of the past. There were still moments of heart-wrenching melancholy, nights when I would lie awake in the quiet dark, the soft murmur of the river carrying fragments of voices I could barely understand, fragments that spoke of love lost and dreams unfulfilled. In those moments, I would feel a surge of grief for the people who had once walked these banks, for the lives that had been etched into the fabric of the land. Yet, even as the pain of their loss resonated with me, I also felt a tender hope, a sense that by remembering them, by acknowledging the sorrow and beauty of their stories, I could help ensure that their legacy would endure. I began to incorporate these reflections into my writing, my journal evolving into a rich tapestry of observations, personal memories, and historical insights. My words flowed in long, unbroken passages, sometimes raw and anguished, sometimes soft and reflective, as I attempted to capture the ineffable quality of the Connecticut River and the ghostly figures that haunted its banks. I wrote of the way the river's gentle current seemed to smooth away the rough edges of the past, how the ancient symbols carved in stone were like a message from another time, and how each ghostly echo was a call to remember, to honor, and to heal. As the summer approached, the days grew longer and the river shimmered with a vibrant, almost otherworldly energy. I continued my daily rituals of reflection and remembrance, walking along the riverbank at dawn, recording the sounds of the water and the soft, distant echoes of voices, and spending long afternoons in the cool shade of ancient trees with my journal in hand. The farmhouse, though still modest and weathered, began to feel like a sanctuary, a place where I could confront my past without being overwhelmed by it, where the gentle, persistent pulse of history provided both comfort and a challenge to my understanding of life. Greg and I often found ourselves in quiet conversation on the porch as twilight approached, our voices low and thoughtful. "There's a power in this river," Greg would say, his eyes fixed on the rippling water, a kind of living memory that connects us to every moment that has ever passed here. His words, spoken in a tone both practical and deeply poetic, echoed the sentiments I had come to share. I realized then that my decision to come to the Connecticut River was not just about escaping the chaos of modern life, but about finding a place where the ghosts of the past could speak to me, where the legacy of those who had been lost might offer guidance for a future yet to be written. In time, the spectral echoes of the river began to recede into a gentle, almost tender presence. The ghostly voices and shifting images that had once sent shivers down my spine now felt like quiet reminders, soft, lingering touches that reminded me that memory, in all its pain and beauty, was an essential part of who we are. I learned that the past was not a burden to be cast off, but a tapestry to be embraced, a living part of the present that could illuminate our understanding and guide us toward healing. I embraced that truth with a quiet determination, and each day, as I watched the sun rise over the water and painted the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold, I felt more deeply connected to the river and to the stories it held. Now, as I sit here at my weathered desk, my journal open before me and the soft murmur of the Connecticut River serving as a constant companion, I reflect on the journey that has brought me to this point, a journey of loss, of discovery, and of the slow, deliberate process of healing. I have come to understand that the ghosts along this river are not there to haunt me, but to remind me that every life, every moment of sorrow and joy, leaves behind an echo that endures long after the moment has passed. My writing, my photographs, and every quiet ritual I perform are a tribute to that enduring legacy, a testament to the idea that memory, in its purest form, is both a burden and a blessing. I remain here, on the banks of the Connecticut River, not because I have all the answers, but because I have learned that the beauty of life lies in its uncertainties, in the delicate balance between the seen and the unseen, the known and the mysterious. Each day is a step deeper into the narrative of the past, a narrative that continues to unfold in the gentle rush of the river and the soft whisper of the wind. I am both a witness and a participant in this eternal dialogue between life and memory, and I carry with me the conviction that by embracing the echoes of those who have gone before, I can help forge a future illuminated by the quiet, unyielding light of remembrance. This is my account, a chronicle of my life along the Connecticut River, where every ripple, every ghostly murmur, and every flicker of ancient light is a reminder that the past is not dead, but lives on, shaping our present and guiding our future. In this remote corner of rural Connecticut, I have found not only a refuge from the chaos of modern existence, but a profound connection to a history that is as vibrant and sorrowful as the flowing river itself. And so I continue to write, to listen, and to honor the voices of the lost, knowing that in every whispered echo there lies the promise of healing, a promise that even the faintest murmurs of the past can light the way toward a new dawn. I arrived at the Delaware Water Gap on a rain-soaked afternoon that seemed to wash away all the pretensions of modern life. I had left behind the sterile confines of the laboratory and the endless routine of academic deadlines, driven by a restless urge to reconnect with nature in its rawest form. My name is Serena Mills, and I had long suspected that true understanding could only come when one allowed oneself to be enveloped by the wild, where every gust of wind and every shifting shadow told stories that no textbook ever could. The moment I drove through the narrow, winding roads that sliced between towering hardwood forests and glacially carved boulders, I felt an almost tangible pulse in the air, a steady, ancient rhythm that whispered of secrets hidden deep in the wilderness. The cabin I'd rented was nothing more than a humble structure built from reclaimed wood and stone, perched on a gentle slope overlooking a slow-moving stream that cut its way through the water gap like a silver thread. It wasn't luxurious by any means. Its walls were weathered and mottled with age, and the roof leaked on rainy days. But there was a beauty to its simplicity, a directness that appealed to the part of me tired of artifice. I spent the first few days acclimating to the isolation, listening to the chorus of creaking timbers, rustling leaves, and the constant murmur of water that seemed to breathe life into the land. Every sound was amplified in the stillness. Every movement of the wind felt deliberate. In that quiet solitude, I could almost sense that the very ground beneath my feet was alive with memory. My first encounter with the uncanny came one evening, as the sun sank low behind the dense canopy. I was out on the porch, a mug of herbal tea warming my hands, when I noticed something strange. A series of symbols, etched into a large boulder near the edge of the property, that shimmered faintly in the twilight. At first, I assumed it was merely the result of natural erosion, but upon closer inspection, I saw that the markings were too deliberate. A series of curves and lines that formed an intricate pattern. I knelt there for what felt like an eternity, tracing the carvings with trembling fingers as my mind raced with possibilities. Had these symbols been left by the indigenous peoples who once revered these lands, or were they the work of someone long forgotten, perhaps even a message from the spirits of the water gap? I snapped several photos and jotted down notes in my ever-present field journal, determined to return with more research. The boulder seemed to hum with a subtle energy, a silent promise that the ancient history of the place was still very much alive. In the days that followed, my solitude was punctuated by a series of odd phenomena that challenged every notion of what was natural. Mornings began with the forest coming to life, birds calling in a chorus that seemed too measured, too mournful. The stream, usually a placid mirror, reflecting in ripples that suggested movement beneath the surface. I would wander the narrow trails, recorder in hand, capturing every nuance of the ambient sounds. Sometimes, when the forest was still and the sky overcast, I'd catch the faintest whisper, a disembodied voice that carried a cadence so ancient it sent shivers through my spine. The words were indecipherable, more like a soft chant than a language, and they seemed to echo off the rocky walls of the gap. I began to suspect that these sounds were not mere products of wind and water, but echoes from a time when the land was sacred, when every stone and tree bore the memory of those who had lived in harmony with nature. I wasn't alone in my quest for understanding. My neighbor, Joe, a kindly handyman with a quiet smile and a lifetime of knowledge about these woods, became an invaluable guide. Joe had grown up in the area and knew every creek, every hidden glade, every legend that had been whispered around campfires for generations. One cool evening, as we sat on the rickety porch sipping coffee that he'd brewed over an old wood stove, Joe told me a story that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. They say that on moonless nights, the water gap speaks, he said slowly, his eyes narrowing as he glanced toward the dark tree line. People have seen strange lights dancing on the stream, heard voices that sound like old prayers, and even caught glimpses of figures that vanish when you blink. His words were not meant to frighten, but to warn, an invitation to listen carefully to the land's ancient voice. I pressed him for more details, but Joe only smiled wryly and said, "Some things are better left to the imagination, Serena. The water holds many secrets, and it won't give them up easily." At first, I tried to dismiss these accounts as local folklore, remnants of a bygone era when superstition reigned over reason. But, as the days passed, the strange phenomena became impossible to ignore. One night, while I sat on the porch listening to the steady murmur of the stream, I noticed a soft, pulsing glow in the distance. At first, it was just a faint light, like the flicker of a candle far away, but gradually it grew more distinct, dancing along the surface of the water. I stood up, heart pounding, and walked toward the source, my recorder held tightly in my hand. The light moved in an almost rhythmic pattern, pulsing as if in time with some silent heartbeat. I reached a bend in the stream where the water pooled in a natural basin, and there, for a brief, heart-stopping moment, I saw the figure, a ghostly outline of a woman, her features indistinct, standing in the water as though she were part of it. The sight was both mesmerizing and deeply sorrowful. I raised my recorder and captured the sound of the rushing water mixed with what seemed like a faint, mournful melody, a melody that vanished as quickly as the vision appeared. The next day, I combed through my notes and recordings, trying to piece together a coherent narrative out of the disjointed images and sounds. I consulted the tattered notebooks I had found in the cabin, collections of observations left behind by previous occupants who had, it seemed, also sensed the mysterious pull of this place. One entry, written in a spidery hand, mentioned that the water gap was a place where the boundary between the physical and the spiritual was at its thinnest, and that one might hear the song of the lost on a quiet night. I felt a shiver of recognition as I read those words. It was as if the voice in the water had been speaking directly to me, calling me to remember that some truths could only be felt, not explained. In the evenings, I began to incorporate simple rituals into my daily routine, small acts of reverence meant to honor the ancient spirit of the land. Each night, before the darkness settled fully, I would step out onto the creaking porch and light a single candle, its gentle flame flickering against the night. I'd sprinkle a few grains of coarse salt at the threshold, a practice Joe had mentioned as a traditional way to ward off malevolent energies, and murmur a quiet prayer, a prayer I'd learned from an old book of folk remedies. The rituals didn't banish the strange occurrences, but they did lend a sense of control, a feeling that I could at least acknowledge and honor the unseen forces at work, rather than be overwhelmed by them. My writing, once a sporadic exercise in capturing the beauty of the natural world, soon became a lifeline, a way to process the raw, unfiltered emotions that surged within me as I confronted the mysteries of Silver Springs. Every day, I recorded the minutiae of the environment, the precise time the spectral light appeared, the cadence of the distant, almost imperceptible chanting that sometimes rose from the springs, the shifting patterns of the water when the wind was just right. I scribbled fervently in my journal, blending scientific observations with personal reflections. There were moments when I felt as though the water itself was a mirror to my soul, reflecting back all the pain and hope that I had carried with me for so long. I wrote about the ghostly figure I had seen, a fleeting image that hovered in the mist like a sorrowful reminder of lives cut tragically short, and I wondered if she was a lost spirit, an echo of someone whose story had been swallowed by time. The deeper I delved into the local lore, the more I became convinced that Silver Springs was a repository of forgotten histories. I spent long afternoons in the town library, poring over old newspapers and historical records that detailed tragedies on the water. A shipwreck here, a drowning there, and stories of a young woman who had vanished during a violent storm, leaving behind nothing but whispered legends of love and loss. Each account was tinged with a profound melancholy, a testament to the impermanence of life and the enduring power of memory. I learned that many believed the water held the souls of those who had been claimed by it, their voices lingering in the gentle lapping of the waves and the rustling of the overhanging cypresses. I couldn't help but feel that the strange phenomena I had witnessed were connected to these ancient sorrows, a silent conversation between the living and the lost. As the months passed, I began to see the interplay between the tangible and the ethereal in a new light. The supernatural occurrences were no longer merely inexplicable anomalies. They were pieces of a vast, ongoing narrative that linked the present with a past that refused to fade. My journal entries grew longer and more introspective, chronicling not only the physical details of the hauntings, but also the emotional landscape that they evoked within me. I wrote of the way the air seemed to vibrate with a quiet, persistent energy on nights when the water shimmered with an otherworldly glow, and of the feeling that each ripple on the surface of Silver Springs was a heartbeat, a reminder that even the most transient moments left their mark on the world. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed by the weight of it all, a deep, unshakable sadness that seemed to echo the lost voices of the past. I would lie awake in the small, creaking bed of the cabin, listening to the constant murmur of the springs mingled with the soft rustle of the surrounding trees, and I would wonder if my own grief was merging with the sorrow of those long gone. But even in those moments of quiet despair, I found a fragile, resolute hope. I began to believe that by embracing the mysteries of Silver Springs, by recording its sounds, capturing its spectral images, and honoring its ancient rituals, I was not only unearthing a hidden history, but also healing my own wounded soul. The water, with its endless ebb and flow, became a metaphor for my journey, a reminder that no matter how deep the pain, there was always the possibility of renewal. I often sat on the porch at dawn, the world hushed and expectant, watching as the first light broke over the water in a cascade of pale pink and gold. In those moments, I felt an almost sacred connection to the past, a sense that the voices I heard on the wind were not trying to terrify me but to guide me, to remind me that every ending carried within it the seed of a new beginning. I would write down my thoughts, my hopes, and my lingering questions, my pen moving with a steady, meditative rhythm as I tried to capture the ineffable beauty of a place that defied the boundaries of time. My friend Carter, ever the practical anchor in a sea of uncertainty, would sometimes join me in these quiet rituals. As we sat together on the creaking porch, the soft glow of a lantern flickering between us, he would say in his measured tone, "Tara, I never believed in ghosts or curses, but I can't ignore the way this place speaks to us. It's like every whisper, every ripple, is a reminder that we are not alone in our sorrows, that the past is always with us, shaping us in ways we can't even imagine." His words resonated with me deeply, affirming my belief that the spirits of Silver Springs were messengers, not malefactors, keepers of a legacy of both pain and healing. As spring deepened into a vibrant summer, The oppressive humidity that had once felt like a weight around my neck gradually gave way to a sense of renewal. The water of Silver Springs, still mysterious and reflective, began to shimmer with a newfound brilliance under the clear, unyielding light of the sun. My recordings, once filled with eerie, melancholic echoes, now sometimes captured a softer, almost playful undertone, as if the water were laughing quietly at the absurdity of life and death. I realized that the spectral presence was not a constant force of despair, but a shifting tapestry of emotion, a blend of sorrow and hope that allowed me to see that the past, though immutable, need not define the future. I continued to document my experiences with an intensity born of both fear and wonder, my journal a living testament to the power of memory and the relentless pulse of nature. I painted as well, translating the elusive interplay of light, water, and shadow into canvases that were both haunting and beautiful. Each brush stroke was a meditation on loss and redemption, a quiet rebellion against the notion that sorrow was something to be banished rather than embraced. My art became a bridge between the tangible and the spectral, a way to express the deep, unspoken emotions that had come to define my existence at Silver Springs. Now, as I sit at my weathered desk inside the cabin, the soft murmur of the water a constant, soothing lullaby in the background, I reflect on the journey that brought me here, a journey marked by heartbreak, mystery, and a profound, enduring hope. I have come to understand that the ghostly echoes of Silver Springs are not a curse to be lifted, but a legacy to be honored, a legacy that reminds us that every life, every moment of pain, leaves behind an indelible mark on the tapestry of time. My recordings capture the voices of those long gone. My journal holds the secrets of a land that has seen centuries pass like the gentle ripple of water, and my paintings serve as a reminder that beauty can emerge even from the depths of sorrow. I choose to remain at Silver Springs not because I have found all the answers, but because I have learned to live with the mystery, to accept that some truths are not meant to be unraveled by the logic of modern science, but experienced in the quiet, enduring language of memory. Each day, as I step outside onto the weathered dock and gaze out over the shimmering water, I feel an overwhelming connection to the past, to the souls who have left their mark on these sacred waters, and to the part of myself that, despite everything, still yearns for healing. This is my account, a chronicle of my life by Silver Springs, where the clear, reflective water carries the voices of the lost and the promise of new beginnings. It is a story of transformation, of turning grief into art, of listening to the silent whispers of the past and finding in them the strength to move forward. As I continue to record the soft murmur of the water and the elusive echoes of voices that speak of a time when the world was simpler and sorrows were shared openly, I find that the mystery of Silver Springs has become a part of who I am, a part that, in its own quiet, unyielding way, offers me the hope that even the deepest wounds can one day be healed by the gentle caress of time and the eternal rhythm of nature. And so I remain here, at the edge of Silver Springs, with my journal, my recorder, and my paintbrushes as my constant companions, ever mindful of the delicate balance between the past and the present, between loss and the promise of renewal. Each sunrise brings with it a new page in the story of this place, a story that I am determined to write, one that speaks of both sorrow and the quiet, enduring beauty of a life lived in harmony with the mysteries of nature.